Chapter 1128. Ding! Congratulations to the host for completing the mission of delivering a warm winter breakfast to the cleaners. You have received a reward. A recipe for congee with pork and century egg. On the road to becoming the god of cookery, your temperament has been improved and sharpened. At the same time, you have received a good person card. Collecting 5 good person cards will give you a chance to make a wish, the system's voice sounded. A chance to make a wish? What's that? Meg was slightly stunned and asked curiously. A chance to make a wish. The host can make a wish to the system, and the system will try its best to fulfill it. Then how do I get the good person card? Meg continued to ask. This chance to make a wish sounded very good. As long as the host does good deeds, there is a certain chance to get the good person card. That's really a good person card. Meg curled his lips. It didn't sound very reliable. God knows how many good deeds he had to do to get 5 good person cards. Looking at the shiny recipe for the congee with pork and century egg that appeared in his mind, this was probably the easiest task he had ever done. However, the task had already begun, and the responsibility had just begun. Providing the cleaners with a steaming hot breakfast every day was something that needed to be persisted for a long time. Everyone is too polite. From tomorrow morning onwards, please come to Mamie's entrance at 6:30 a.m. I will provide a free breakfast for everyone, Meg said to everyone with a smile. Everyone praised Meg again. Mr. Sidka, can you give me a list of everyone's names, and then let me get to know everyone? In order to prevent other people from sneaking in and causing people to not be able to eat breakfast, I want to do a simple introduction, Meg said to Sidka while looking at him. Of course, Mr. Meg is indeed very thoughtful. Sidka nodded and walked quickly to his desk. He pulled out a list from a pile of messy papers and handed it to Meg. At the same time, he began to introduce the names to Meg one by one. Okay, thank you. Meg kept the list. He had already memorized everyone's names. This way, he didn't have to worry about other people sneaking in for the free breakfast. Then, I will take my leave first. Meg nodded slightly to old Jack and his wife, and then left. He had to go back and prepare some things. This Meg is really a good person. Yeah, I heard that the cheapest food in that restaurant costs at least 200 copper coins. I have never eaten such expensive food before. After Meg left, the cleaners were still discussing with expectant smiles on their faces. All right, everyone is dismissed. Go back and rest, Sidka said. Everyone dispersed. Meg returned to the restaurant. Yabamiya and the others had most likely gone to the ice cream shop, leaving Anna crouched in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with Ugly Duckling in her arms as she looked outside in a daze. Meg stood to the side and watched for a while. Then he slowly walked over and squatted down beside Anna. He whispered, Anna, what are you thinking about? I'm wondering if Shirley and big sister Aisha will meet on the battlefield. Anna turned to look at Meg with a worried expression. If they meet, will one of them die? They won't. Meg shook his head with a smile. No matter if it's Aisha or Shirley, they won't hurt each other, even if they really stand on opposite sides. After all, they have fought side by side. Anna thought for a while, and a smile appeared on her face. She nodded and said, they are both very kind elves and also real elves. All right, let's not sit here and daydream. I'll teach you how to make Yangzhou fried rice today, okay? Meg said with a smile as he placed his big hand on Anna's head gently. Really? Anna's eyes lit up. She had been practicing her knife skills these days, and she had never cooked before. Of course, Anna's knife skills are already very good. She can cut the ingredients into the required size for fried rice. It's time to start learning how to cook. Meg nodded, and then he mentally purchased a set of cooking utensils suitable for Anna from the system. The wok provided by the system was half the size of a normal wok. It looked a little mini, but it was still a big wok for Anna. The spatula was also a size smaller. Even Anna's small hands could easily hold it, and she didn't need to use much effort. Anna moved a small stool over and stood on it, just enough to reach the height of the stove. She looked at Meg expectantly. She had to watch Uncle Meg make hundreds of plates of Yangzhou fried rice every day. Every step and detail was deeply imprinted in her heart, but she didn't have the chance to practice. Now, she could finally try to make a plate of Yangzhou fried rice that belonged to her. Yangzhou fried rice is a very complicated dish. There are very strict requirements regarding the control of the fire and the timing of adding the ingredients. Let's start with the ingredients. Meg took out 2 sets of ingredients from the fridge, gave one to Anna, and held the other for himself. He started to teach her attentively. Anna stared at Meg without blinking. Although she had seen the same steps thousands of times, she still didn't want to miss any details. She remembered every word that Meg said in her heart. A plate of Yangzhou fried rice that looked, smelled, and tasted good was soon out of the wok. Okay, Anna, you can start cooking for the first time. Meg put the plate of Yangzhou fried rice aside and said with a smile. Okay. Anna nodded. She glanced at Meg, then withdrew her gaze. She stood in front of the chopping table for a while with her eyes closed. Then she opened her eyes again and picked up the Chinese kitchen knife. Her small hands held the broad Chinese kitchen knife, but it didn't feel cumbersome at all. The knife fell on the chopping board, making a rhythmic sound. The ingredients were reduced to the size of rice grains one by one under the knife. Then Anna put them on a plate for later use. She turned on the fire, poured the oil, and put the ingredients into the wok with the right temperature. She stir-fried and tossed the wok. Everything was done smoothly. It was obviously Anna's first time cooking, but her performance amazed Meg. It didn't seem like something a 6- or 7-year-old child could do. This child is really talented. Meg couldn't help but praise her in his heart. She would definitely become a better chef than him in the future. Anna turned off the fire and took the first plate of Yangzhou fried rice out of the wok. She carefully brought it over and put it next to Meg's plate. She looked at Meg expectantly and said, "Uncle Meg, try it." A plate of Yangzhou fried rice that is burnt. When the 2 plates of Yangzhou fried rice were put together, the difference in appearance became very obvious. In Anna's plate, the winter bamboo shoots and tree mushrooms were burnt yellow. The eggs weren't perfectly wrapped around the rice, and many of them were damaged. The oil was too shiny. The amount of oil used was a bit too much. Okay, I'll try it. Meg picked up the spoon and put a spoonful of Yangzhou fried rice into his mouth. The salty taste almost made him spit it out. The salt wasn't evenly fried, so the burnt taste was very obvious. Chapter 1129. This was a Yangzhou fried rice that was full of flaws. However, this was also the first time that Anna had cooked Yangzhou fried rice with a spoon. Meg swallowed the fried rice and gave her a thumbs up with a smile. Overall, it's not bad. However, there's still a lot of room for improvement in the control of the fire, the technique, and the use of salt. However, it's already very impressive for Anna to be able to do this for the first time. It seems that there are still many flaws. However, I'll continue to work hard. Anna nodded with a happy smile on her face. Anna, wait for me here for a while. We'll go to the market later and buy some ingredients for you to practice. Meg reached out and touched Anna's head. Then, he turned around and went upstairs. Tapping on the glittering recipe in his mind, a stream of information flowed directly into his mind. Congee with pork and century egg. It wasn't a complicated congee, but it was delicious enough. Cooking the congee itself wasn't a complicated job. However, making the delicious century egg was the most difficult process in this dish. Century egg was also known as century egg. It could be considered as a kind of dark Eastern cuisine. Meg had an average impression of century egg. He didn't like it very much, but he didn't hate it either. If he could come across a plate of salad with century egg that tasted good, he would still eat a few pieces. According to the usual method, it would take about 30 days to make century egg. After the system's upgrade process and the modification of the cooking utensils, the curing time of century egg was shortened from 30 days to 3 days. However, in this way, even if Meg learned how to make congee with pork and century egg tonight, he still wouldn't be able to present a bowl of piping hot congee with pork and century egg to the cleaners tomorrow morning due to the lack of ingredients. System, are you digging a hole for me? Can congee with pork and century egg without century egg still be called congee with pork and century egg? Meg rolled his eyes and said, Host, please don't worry. As long as the host can learn how to cook congee with pork and century egg, the system has already prepared the century egg you need for 3 days. It won't affect the sales, the system replied. What kind of egg are you using? How much is a century egg? Meg continued to ask. The system uses the duck eggs of the Kashmir duck from the Morning Light Lake in the northwest of the Twilight Forest. The Kashmir duck is a level 3 magical beast. It feeds on fish, and its eggs are rich in nutrients. It tastes sweet and cool and has the effect of nourishing Een and clearing the lungs. It lays only 1 egg per month, and the quantity is extremely small. The century eggs made by this system are made from the yellow soil of Vic Mountain and the ashes from the rice that was irrigated by the water of life. All right, just tell me the price. Meg rolled his eyes. The price of a century egg as an ingredient is 200 copper coins. A century egg can be used to cook 4 bowls of congee with pork and century egg, the system replied. Meg thought for a while and asked, System, if I use ordinary duck eggs and materials that are relatively easy to obtain to make century eggs, what's the cost of 1 century egg? Host, as a candidate for the god of cookery, it's the most basic character to use the most perfect ingredients to cook delicious food for the customers. In the case where there are excellent ingredients to choose from, how can you use ordinary ingredients to make up the numbers? This is not in line with the identity and taste of the god of cookery. First of all, I'm an owner who needs to consider the profits of the restaurant. While doing good deeds, I have to control the investment cost and prevent the restaurant from being exposed to risks because of my personal feelings and actions. This is a sign of having a brain and has nothing to do with identity and taste. Meg calmly interrupted the system. However, using ordinary ingredients can't perfectly display the deliciousness of this dish. It's not in line with the host's ability as a candidate for the god of cookery. It's not conducive to building the reputation of the god of cookery, the system insisted. I'll use ordinary ingredients and the most sincere cooking skills to serve a bowl of congee with pork and century egg to these hard-working cleaners. The purpose is not to start a journey of gourmet food for them, but to let them work continuously in the cold for a few hours so that they can have a bowl of piping hot and delicious congee. This will make it easier for them to get through this cold winter. System, you're neglecting the essentials and focusing on the details. You haven't grasped the real point. Mag pursed his lips mockingly and then directly said, Prepare 33 servings of ordinary century eggs for me. The market price of an ordinary duck egg is 2 copper coins each. I'll charge you 5 copper coins for the processing fee, and I'll give you 3 copper coins for the consumption. 1 ordinary century egg will be 10 copper coins. Host, it's settled then. Meg calmly interrupted the system and continued. For the congee with pork and century egg sold in the restaurant, I'll get the best century egg from you. You'll be responsible for the supply of ordinary century eggs in the future. The order is stable, the price is fair, and the profit margin is more than 5 times. This kind of business, if you miss this village, there won't be such a shop again, Meg said with a smile. I'll do it, the system almost blurted out. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly. After confirming the ingredients in his mind, he turned around and went downstairs with a basket of vegetables. He brought Anna out to buy ingredients. Learning to cook required a large amount of ingredients. The cost of ingredients in the fridge was too high, so Meg planned to let Anna practice with ordinary ingredients first, just like Phyllis did previously. What he wanted to buy were the ingredients needed to make breakfast for the cleaners tomorrow morning. Reducing the cost of doing good deeds was the way to go in the long run. Meg's money didn't fall from the sky. He still had his own standards for doing things at different stages. 100 duck eggs, 2 bags of good quality pearl rice, a piece of lean meat, and various ingredients needed to make century eggs. When they came out of the market, Meg's basket was already filled with various ingredients. Send the rice to Amy's in half an hour, Meg said to the rice shop owner who was loading the cart. He carried the basket and took Anna to a building material store not far from the market. After buying some yellow soil and plant ash, they returned to the restaurant. Uncle Meg, are you planting flowers? Anna asked curiously as she looked at Meg, who put down the yellow soil and plant ash and other things. No, I'm planning to make a dish called century eggs. Meg shook his head and put the things behind the cabinet. He had to wait until he entered the test field for the god of cookery tonight before he could start making century eggs. Century eggs? Anna thought for a while. She had never heard of this dish. However, she had never heard of any of the dishes that Uncle Meg made, but they always brought her surprises. Anna, if you want to continue practicing, you can use these ingredients first. When you can make Yangzhou fried rice to my satisfaction, you can use the ingredients in the fridge. Meg took out the ingredients that belonged to Anna and put them on the cutting table with a smile. Chapter 11:30. Moreton Manor, in a quaint study room. Cyril stood and looked at Geoffrey, who was bent over a report. He said carefully, "Father, the matter of letting Gloria become a director of the Chamber of Commerce has caused a lot of dissatisfaction and discussion among the directors. Do you think we should give an explanation to the directors and remove Gloria from her position to appease the directors?" Dissatisfaction? Geoffrey raised his head and looked at Cyril with some mockery. "Since when do I need to look at other people's faces when making decisions? Besides, who else will be dissatisfied with this matter other than you?" Cyril's lips trembled, and he slowly clenched his fist. He steeled his heart and looked at Geoffrey. "President, Gloria is only a woman after all. You only have one son left. If you continue to support Gloria and make me a joke, who will inherit family Moreton and the Aden Chamber of Commerce in the future? Are you really willing to hand over the family to a woman who will be married off in the future? You?" Geoffrey slammed the report in his hand on the table. He looked at the fearless Cyril, who was staring straight at him. This unfilial thing actually dared to speak to him like this. Blood rushed to his head, and he suddenly felt dizzy. Cyril was initially still a little fearful, but upon seeing Geoffrey's reaction, he was no longer fearful. A cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "Father, there's no way that big brother is going to inherit the family fortune. Family Moreton is such a big family property. If you don't want to see it fall into someone else's hands, then you should train me well. Only I can make family Moreton prosper. Get out! Get out!" Geoffrey picked up the report on the table and threw it at Cyril. Cyril dodged to the side and looked at Cyril, who was lying on the chair with his eyes closed. He bent down to pick up the report and put it back on the table. He smiled and said, "Since Father is not feeling well, then I will take my leave. The Chamber of Commerce's year-end banquet is in a few days. I will propose to the board of directors that Gloria be kicked out of the board on that day." After that, Cyril didn't wait for Geoffrey to get angry and quickly walked out of the door. Geoffrey fumbled for a small bottle from the drawer and opened the cap with trembling hands. He raised his head and took a big gulp. After a while, he let out a long sigh. His flushed face gradually receded, and he opened his eyes. His usually wise and dignified eyes were now filled with a trace of loneliness. Was I really in the wrong all those years ago? Geoffrey looked out the window in a daze. In order to make Lance inherit the family business, he had forced him to do many things. In the end, Lance gave up his right to inherit the family business and became a teacher at Chaos School. During all these years, in order to ensure that family Moreton could continue to prosper, he had always been nurturing Cyril. He had placed a lot of hope on him and viewed him as his only successor. With this identity, he naturally had nothing to fear. He ate, drank, and played, and didn't pay any attention to the management of the company. Do I really have no choice but to hand over the family business to this kid? Geoffrey's brows furrowed as his heart wavered slightly. A figure then appeared in his mind. Gloria? Geoffrey murmured to himself as he tapped his knuckles on the table. This little girl's recent performance had indeed surprised him. She had been able to turn the suede textile shop, which had been incurring losses for several years, into a profit so quickly. This was something that he didn't expect. Prior to today, he had never seriously considered handing over the family Moreton to Gloria. "Heh, I'm still alive, and you dare to provoke me?" Geoffrey's expression became serious again as he chuckled coldly. "If that old geezer Ian can hand over the Buffett family to that little girl, Hill, then do you think I won't hand over the Moreton family to Gloria? Instead of handing it over to that wastrel to wreak havoc in the family, why not hand it over to Gloria, who's more capable? That little girl is very meticulous and has good aptitude. With some nurturing, she won't be inferior to Lance." "Menard!" Geoffrey yelled toward the door. Menard pushed open the door and walked in. "Go get Mars," Jeffrey instructed. "Yes," Menard replied in a respectful manner before quickly departing. "Mr. Cyril, did the conversation with the old man go well?" A middle-aged man stood in the pavilion of the Moriton Manor and smiled as he looked at Cyril, who was walking briskly toward him, just as family head Bowen expected. Although the old man was very angry, he only told me to get lost. It seems that he really didn't want to hand over the Moriton family and the Aden Chamber of Commerce to Gloria. Cyril chuckled in a carefree manner. He had been living under Jeffrey's thumb for so many years, and he was finally able to hold his head high for once. Family head Jeffrey has mocked old man Ian's decision to hand the Buffett family over to Mr. Hill more than once. How could he hand over the family business to a daughter, especially a granddaughter of a generation? "The position of the head of family Moriton will definitely be yours, Mr. Cyril," Bowen said with a smile, as if he had expected this. Cyril's face was full of joy as he looked at Bowen and said, "Family head Bowen, you promised to help me fight for the position of the head of the family. The first step is to remove Gloria from her position at the year-end banquet. Will there be any problems with this?" "Don't worry. The Marquis family and the Dodges family still have some influence in the Chamber of Commerce. Everyone knows that you will be the head of family Moriton sooner or later. How could the directors not agree to your request? When the time comes, as long as half of the directors vote to remove Gloria, even the chairman won't be able to stop it." Bowen stroked his beard as he looked at Cyril and said, "However, after this is done, what Mr. Cyril promised, don't worry, family head Bowen. As long as I can inherit family Moriton's business and become the head of the family, I will definitely help you become the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in the next election," Cyril said with a nod. "Very good. Mr. Cyril is indeed a smart person. Then I will make a trip to the Dodges family now." Boer's smile became even brighter as he bid farewell and left. "Father, why should we help Cyril? He is the most dishonest person. His words can't be trusted." In the luxurious carriage, a young man looked at Bowen with a puzzled expression. "Cyril is just an idiot who can't be helped. As long as he becomes the head of family Moriton, this fat piece of meat will be eaten up by us sooner or later. Since that's the case, why don't we help him?" Bowen sneered. "One shear is enough. If there's another Gloria, then our Marquis family really won't be able to make a name for themselves." Chapter 1131. Mr. Meg. When it was close to noon, there was a knock on the door and Gina's voice. Meg opened the door, and Gina and Elizabeth came in empty-handed. "Gina, didn't you go to get the shark's fin?" Meg looked outside the door. There were no shark's fin outside, either. "Mr. Meg, you are really Alex's benefactor." Gina pounced on Meg excitedly and wrapped her legs around him naturally like an octopus. Meg looked at Gina, who was hugging him tightly with an agitated expression and with a little confused. The nether sharks that invaded Lantist were all killed by the warriors of Lantist with the help of the divine weapon you gave them. The rest of them have been locked up in the fishery according to your request and have entered captivity mode. The invasion of the nether sharks this time did not cause any casualties among the merfolk, and none of the cities were seriously damaged because of the nether sharks. All of this is because of you. Gina looked up at Meg as if she was looking at a god that she worshipped. "Is that so? That's great." Meg's eyes lit up when he heard that. It was a good thing that the merfolk of Lantist could not be harmed by the nether sharks, and the successful establishment of the deep-sea fishery also indicated the successful establishment of the nether shark's fin and shark's lip supply chain. How did he do it? How did he manage to subdue such a powerful magical beast so easily and solve a problem that a powerful tribe could not solve for thousands of years? Elizabeth looked at Meg curiously, as if she was meeting him for the first time. She originally thought that he was just an ordinary human chef who came to work at Amy's only because of Mia's invitation. But now, she felt that Meg did not seem like an ordinary person. Whether it was his usual calmness when facing all kinds of powerful guests, or the negotiation with the high priest of Lantist on the surface of the sea, it all showed that he was different from the rest. There seemed to be many special abilities hidden in this man that kept surprising and making people curious. But Where's the shark's fin? Meg asked Gina. Oh. Gina quickly let go of Meg and took out a small blue crystal ball. She smiled and said, because there were too many shark fins, I couldn't bring them back. Therefore, the high priestess gave me the sub-ball of the mother-child crystal ball to store the shark fins and lips. Meg looked at the marble-sized crystal ball in Gina's hand. The dark blue color looked like it contained an ocean. It was indeed similar to the large crystal ball in the hands of the high priest last time, but it was much smaller. It looked like it was a spatial artifact. A lot? How many are there? Meg asked. Gina thought for a moment and said, there are about 500 of them. If I release them, they can fill up the entire kitchen. Meg observed 3 seconds of silence for the nether sharks. Then he looked at Gina and said, then release 50 servings first. I need to dry them. I still have to make 2 servings of Buddha jumps over the wall today. I'm here for work. Camilla pushed the door open and entered. She glanced at everyone and greeted them casually. Then she walked straight to the kitchen. When she saw that there was no one in the kitchen, she turned back to look at Meg in surprise. Where's Miss Phyllis, the lady who told me to cut the vegetables? Meg looked at Camilla and said, she has already left. From today onwards, you will be in charge of the food preparation work. Title, Beginner Stool. Left? Camilla was stunned. She pointed at the list of ingredients at the side and raised her voice. Doesn't that mean that I have to cut all these vegetables by myself? Meg said nonchalantly, this is Phyllis's daily job. If you find it difficult, I can take care of part of it. Camilla waved her hand and said confidently, there's no need for that. How can I not complete such a simple job? Meg glanced at his watch and said with a smile, there's still an hour before business starts. Then you can start first. Camilla snorted and went upstairs to change into her chef's uniform. She quickly entered the restaurant and equipped 10 knives. Then she began to cut the ingredients. Starting tomorrow morning, our restaurant will provide breakfast for the cleaners for free. Meg announced during lunch. Providing breakfast for free? Does that mean we won't charge you? Yabamiya was a little surprised. Everyone else also looked at Meg. With the price of Mamie's dishes, that was not a small sum of money. Meg nodded slightly and said, those cleaners have to start work at 4 in the morning. The weather is so cold, but they can only eat breakfast that is as cold as ice. They can't even drink a sip of hot water. I felt that we should do something, so I want to talk to the person in charge about providing breakfast for them, at least until the end of this winter. They are so pitiful. Last time, I saw an old man fall into the snow. Luckily, I managed to dodge in time. The uncle next to him helped him to the hospital. After that, I never saw him again. Amy said with pity. Meg looked at Amy in surprise. He did not expect that he was so close to bankruptcy. Boss, when will the breakfast be provided? Will it be the same as the restaurant's business hours? Yabamiya asked. Meg shook his head and said, no, the agreed time is 7 in the morning every day. However, I will take care of this matter. You don't have to worry about it. The business hours will not change. Boss, you are really a good person. Yabamiya gave Meg a thumbs up and said with a smile, then, starting tomorrow morning, I will come to the restaurant earlier. This guy, is he purposely increasing his favorability? Those humans who sweep the floor are not slaves. It's just a job. What's so pitiful about them? Camilla looked at Meg and pursed her lips with disdain. Humans just like to make a mountain out of a molehill. My business hours are the same as Mia's, Elizabeth said coldly. Barbara blinked and said, since you are all here then, I will sleep a little longer. The blankets in winter are too comfortable. I don't want to get out of bed at all. I will wake up early. Gina raised her hand and said word by word in the common language of the continent. Then she gave Meg a big smile. I will also wake up early. Anna raised her little hand and said as well. Amy thought for a while and seriously said, if you are all going to wake up early, then I will have to help you all sleep a little longer. Otherwise, you will be tired during the day. Meow. Ugly Duckling put its 2 front paws on Amy's stool and meowed at her. It's okay, Ugly Duckling. I will help you sleep in your portion, too. Just wake up early, Amy consoled. Chapter 1132. Outside Mamie's, a bald middle-aged man looked at Sith agitatedly and said, "Boss, submit the letter of challenge and issue a challenge to Mamie's. Our restaurant's business has doubled during this period, and our new customers are full of praise. The first place on the soup chart should belong to us. It's almost business hours now. It's not very good to submit a letter of challenge at this time." The owner of Sith Restaurant, who was wearing a black chef's suit, held a letter of challenge in his hand with a hesitant expression. The bald middle-aged man shook his head and said, "No, there are so many customers here. They can be witnesses, and we have to tell everyone that our Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup is the real first place on the soup chart. Only then can the Food Association re-rank it. There are so many customers here, and they're still deceived by the wrong ranking on the delicious cuisine chart. This is a ranking that belongs to us. These customers should be queuing outside Sith Restaurant. Boss, shouldn't we fight for our rights and make a sound?" Sith looked at the hundreds of people queuing outside Mamie's and fell silent. Although Sith Restaurant's business was also very good now, it was still a far cry from Mamie's. If Sith Restaurant's business could reach this level, then he would have reached the peak of his life. "All right, let's go and submit the letter of challenge now. We'll have a fair duel to decide who's the real first place on the soup chart." Sith's gaze became determined, and he walked straight to Mamie's. The bald man quickly followed after him. "Who are they? Are they here to cut the queue?" The customers in a long queue looked curiously at the two people walking straight to the restaurant's entrance. If I remember correctly, isn't that the owner of Sith Restaurant? What's he doing here? Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup is not bad. It's quite delicious. Yes, they're freshly caught freshwater seafood. The ingredients are solid, and the quantity is not small. Just the soup alone is indeed one of the rare delicacies in Chaos City. Very soon, some people in the queue recognized Sith and started discussing. Sith came to the restaurant's door and was about to knock. The bell on the door rang, and the door opened from the inside. Meg opened the door and saw a middle-aged man in a black chef's uniform with his hand raised. He asked curiously, "Excuse me, is there anything I can help you with?" "Hello, Mr. Meg. I'm the owner and head chef of Sith Restaurant, Sith." Sith extended his hand towards Meg. "Hello, Boss Sith." Meg reached out and shook his hand. He remembered that the freshwater seafood soup, which was ranked second on the soup rankings, came from Sith Restaurant. This boss, Sith had rushed over aggressively, and it didn't seem like he was here to eat. Sith retracted his hand, looked at Meg, and went straight to the point. "First of all, congratulations to your restaurant for dominating the 6 rankings in the last delicious cuisine ranking. Today, I'm here to challenge you for the first place of the soup ranking. Your braised chicken and rice is indeed excellent, but I also think that my ancestral freshwater seafood soup is not inferior to any other soup. Therefore, I want to have a duel with you to determine the real number 1 on the soup list." "Oh, so you're here to challenge me." Meg understood. Speaking of which, ever since he defeated the head chef of Dukas Restaurant, his reputation had spread far and wide. He hadn't been provoked or challenged for a while. He didn't expect someone to challenge him after dominating the 6 rankings. It really surprised him. "Yes, this is the letter of challenge. Please accept it, Mr. Meg." Sith handed over the letter of challenge in his hand. Meg hesitated for a moment, then reached out to take the letter of challenge. He didn't have a bad impression of this boss, Sith. People with skills would more or less have some pride. The first and second places were natural opponents. If they couldn't accept it, a duel would happen sooner or later. He glanced at the letter of challenge. It was similar to what Sith had said before. With soup as the theme of the duel, a famous gourmet and the president of the Food Association would be invited to be the judges for a professional duel. And the wager was the number 1 on the soup rankings. To be honest, Meg didn't like this kind of meaningless challenge. However, if he were to decline, it would inevitably weaken his prestige. He couldn't help but think about it for a while. Wow, he's actually here to challenge Mr. Mac. This boss, Sith, is a little stubborn, isn't he? The duel between the first and second places on the soup rankings feels like it'll be a very exciting duel. Speaking of which, after the Buddha jumps over the wall was born, are there any other soups? If nothing goes wrong, it'll probably be a one-sided battle. right? When the customers heard Sith's words, they immediately started discussing. The bald, middle-aged man behind Sith looked at Mag and sarcastically said, "Could it be that you were scared? If you don't dare to accept the challenge, as long as you explain it to the Food Association and ask them to change the soup rankings so that Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup is ranked first, we won't force you to do anything." Sith looked at the bald man with some displeasure. However, this matter concerned the future of Sith Restaurant, so he didn't say anything. He looked at Meg and waited for his answer. Meg looked at the bald man and smiled slightly. He folded the letter of challenge and smiled at Sith. "Since Boss Sith has invited me so kindly, I'll accept this letter of challenge. However, you're the one who issued the challenge, and you're the one who set the rules. I'll decide the time and place. That shouldn't be a problem, right?" Sith was a little surprised by Meg's straightforwardness. He thought for a while and nodded. "Then the time will be set at 4:30 p.m. tonight. The duel will take place in front of Mamie's. My restaurant will open for business at 5 p.m. sharp, so I'll have to ask Boss Sith to start cooking earlier. All right, there's one more thing I have to say in advance. The braised chicken and rice from before has been classified as a staple dish by me. I just released a soup called Buddha Jumps Over the Wall yesterday. Because this soup takes up to a day to cook, I won't be cooking it on the spot. I'll be making the finished product directly. I hope everyone knows." Meg continued, "A newly released soup?" Sith was even more surprised. The braised chicken soup from before had already been approved by the Food Association. He didn't expect Meg to abandon it and prepare a newly released soup to duel with him. "Oh, about the wager, other than the first place on the soup rankings, I'd like to increase it a little," Meg said again. Sith looked at Meg with some vigilance and asked, "Increase what?" "The loser has to pay 10,000 copper coins," Meg said with a smile. Chapter 1133. Wow, Mr. Mac accepted the challenge. Looks like I'll have to ask the boss for leave tonight to watch the duel. I usually line up at this time. Looks like I'll be able to watch a good show for free today. Is anyone betting? I'm betting on Mr. Mac. No idiot would bet on a duel without any suspense. The customers were getting excited when they saw Meg accept the challenge. 10,000 copper coins? Sith was stunned. He thought that Meg would raise a big bet. After all, the owner of Ricky's rotisserie lost the entire rotisserie to Mr. Mac when they dueled. He didn't expect that Meg would only raise the bet to 10,000 copper coins. Looks like this guy is really scared. The bald man looked at Meg with disdain. His eyes were burning with passion. As an old employee of Sith's restaurant, he was waiting for the freshwater seafood soup to reach first place. Then, he would flatter the boss and open a new restaurant. When that happened, he would be the best choice for the new restaurant's manager. And the freshwater seafood soup recipe that had been in the boss's hands would probably be passed on to him, right? Yes, 10,000 copper coins. Meg nodded. Okay, I accept. Sith thought for a moment and nodded. I accept the challenge. Mr. Sith, please go ahead. I'm going to open for business. Meg put away the challenge and opened the door. He stepped aside and smiled. Welcome, Mamie's. Mr. Mac, do you need my help? Crassus looked at Sith when he walked to the door. I can help too. Amy came forward, eager to try. That won't be necessary, Meg hurriedly said. He was a little afraid that Crassus and Amy would kill the two of them with a fireball. That would be too cruel. Good luck, Mr. Meg. Gloria stopped when she reached the door. She clenched her little fist and encouraged him with a smile. What right does this guy have to make my lovely Miss Gloria smile? Camilla stood in the corner and looked at Meg with resentment. She gritted her teeth and said, There is no true love between the opposite sex. Thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. Inexplicably, he felt a chill down his spine. Meg greeted the regulars familiarly and ignored Sith. This unreasonable guy. The bald man was a little annoyed and wanted to go forward to reason. That's enough. He's already shown enough self-restraint and magnanimity. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to do that. Sith interrupted the bald man's words and took a deep look at Meg. Although this man was young, his calmness made him a little uneasy. Let's go to the Food Association first and visit a few gourmets. All right. The bald man retracted his gaze unwillingly and turned to catch up with Sith. Mr. Mac, Is there still no news about Miss Shirley? Perhaps she wrote you a letter? Constantine asked expectantly as he came in front of Meg. Meg looked at Constantine and was a little shocked. This eligible bachelor, who always paid attention to his appearance and even combed his hair meticulously, had lost a lot of weight in just a few days. His black eyes were sunken and bloodshot. His hair was messy, and his beard was unkempt. He looked just like a tramp. She didn't send us a letter. Meg shook his head. However, looking at Constantine's appearance, he couldn't bear it. Why did he have such a one-sided love? Moreover, the other party might take out something bigger than him. There's still no news. Constantine seemed to have lost all his strength. His body swayed, and he barely managed to stand up by grabbing onto the doorframe at the side. I hate it so much. I hate that I didn't have the courage to confess my feelings to her in time. I only understood how important she was to me after I lost her. Constantine was already sobbing with tears streaming down his face. What an infatuated man. Yes, there aren't many good men like him nowadays. Many of the regulars had an impression of Constantine. During this period, he often came to ask about Shirley. The regulars naturally remembered that beautiful and quiet elf attendant. They couldn't help but sigh when they saw Constantine like this. Constantine, male, 33 years old. Due to lovesickness, severe insomnia, loss of appetite, rapid decline of bodily functions, and extremely poor immunity. If this state continues, his life will be in danger. Is this guy Liang Shambois? He can even get lovesickness. Meg raised his eyebrows as he looked at the test results given by the omniscient door. It seemed like Shirley's sudden departure was a big blow to Constantine. After thinking for a while, he looked at the heartbroken Constantine and said, "Mr. Constantine, Shirley said that she would come back, but it might be a few years later. She will really come back." Constantine suddenly raised his head and looked at Meg as if he had grabbed onto a life-saving straw. Meg nodded with a smile and said, "However, with the lifespan of elves, Shirley's appearance shouldn't change much no matter how many years pass. If Mr. Constantine continues to live in this state, I'm afraid the next time we meet will be at your funeral." Constantine looked at his pale and thin hands that were almost devoid of blood and was stunned. During this period of time, he was immersed in sorrow and longing and had given up on himself. He almost didn't pay attention to his own body. He didn't expect it to be so weak. No, before Miss Shirley comes back, I have to stay healthy and slow down my aging. I can't let myself age too quickly. Otherwise, Miss Shirley won't be able to recognize me. Constantine quickly made up his mind. He looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Meg, thank you. Even if it's just to see Miss Shirley again and to tell her the words that I didn't have time to say back then, I will definitely live on well." After saying that, he strode into the restaurant and sat down at his familiar seat. "I hope you can live on with determination when your confession fails." Meg shrugged and continued to greet the next customer with a smile. "Ma, the charging station for men. I'm here again." A man walked towards Ma, with light steps, and his eyes were full of passion. Vicenio had already experienced the saying of a newlywed who was like a wolf and a tiger. However, he didn't expect this newlywed period to last so long. His tigress was getting more and more ferocious and almost squeezed him dry in bed every day. If it weren't for Maam's 2 Ruggiamos providing him with motivation every day, he felt that he would have died in bed long ago. Vicenio made up his mind and quickened his pace. "No, I'll have to eat another Ruggiamo to make up for it." Chapter 1134. "Waiter, I'd like 3 Ruggiamos and a savory tofu pudding," Vicenio ordered as soon as he sat down. "All right," Yabamia nodded. Just then, a fragrant breeze wafted over, and a voluptuous woman sat beside Vicenio. She smiled and said, "I'd like 3 Ruggiamos and a savory tofu pudding, too." Vicenio's mouth opened wide when he smelled the familiar fragrance, and he slowly turned around in disbelief. When he saw the woman sitting beside him and sizing him up with a smile, he jumped up from his chair like a mouse whose tail had been stepped on. He exclaimed, "Honey, why are you here?" Everyone in the restaurant looked over, Loud noises were not allowed at Mamie's. Vicenio's skinny appearance was not much better than Constantine's. His face was pale, and he looked like he had kidney deficiency. On the other hand, the young woman sitting beside him had a rosy face, a voluptuous figure, and a charming face. Her eyes were full of gentleness. "Honey, you scared me," the young woman said coquettishly as she patted her chest gently. Her breast shook, and she had a shy look on her face. Who can withstand this? Many men swallowed their saliva subconsciously, and they didn't know whether to look at Vicenio with envy or pity. Vicenio quickly realized that he had overreacted. Thinking of Mamie's rules, he hurriedly sat down again and apologized to Yabamia, who was still standing at the side. He looked at Bonnie and softly said, "Honey, why are you here? Weren't you asleep? How can I sleep when you're gone?" Bonnie clenched her small fist and punched Vicenio's shoulder as she said with an aggrieved expression, "That's why I followed you out. When I saw you enter this restaurant, I was also hungry, so I followed you in. Why do you look so unhappy? Could it be that eating with me is something that makes you unhappy? How can that be? I saw that you were tired, so I didn't call you." Vicenio wanted to slap himself. He actually didn't realize that Bonnie was followed by Bonnie. "No, you're the one who's tired." Bonnie took out a silk handkerchief from her chest and wiped Vicenio's forehead. "Look, you're sweating." I just walked over. It's just a little sweat." Vicenio's voice was trembling. His wife was a tigress, not a shy kitten. She would only act like this in front of outsiders. If they were in bed, it would be a different story. Cough, cough. Mia, who was being fed dog food at the side, cleared her throat and interrupted the two of them. "Both of you want 3 Ruggiamos and a savory tofu pudding each, right?" "Yes, I want the same as him." Bonnie smiled and nodded. She sized up Mia and praised, "Miss, you're really beautiful." She then glanced at Vicenio from the corner of her eyes. Did this bastard come out to eat every day because of the beautiful waitresses in this restaurant? Vicenio could only pretend that he didn't understand Bonnie's gaze. He hurriedly interrupted, No. "Honey, the Ruggiamos aren't delicious. They don't suit your taste. You can have the rainbow fried rice. That's beautiful and delicious. And the tofu pudding. You usually like to eat sweet things. Although I chose the savory side, the sweet tofu pudding might suit your taste better. Rainbow fried rice." Bonnie's eyes lit up when she heard that. The name of the dish sounded quite interesting. Could this restaurant really use beautiful rainbows to cook fried rice? But why did her own bastard stop her from eating Ruggiamos? A hint of suspicion appeared in Bonnie's eyes. "Honey, hurry up and order. The other customers are still waiting." Vicenio felt a little guilty. He then directly said to Yabamia, "Give her a Yangzhou fried rice and a sweet tofu pudding. That's all." "All right, please wait a moment." Yabamia nodded and turned to walk to the next customer. Vicenio heaved a sigh of relief. The Ruggiamos were too strong. He could barely compete with Bonnie after eating them. If Bonnie also ate, he already couldn't imagine the possible outcome. Bonnie sized up the restaurant. The comfortable decorations and perfect partitions. She retracted her gaze and looked at Vicenio sadly. "Honey, you really know how to choose a place. But why didn't you bring me to such an elegant restaurant in the past? You ate alone and didn't care about me at all. It's so sad." Vicenio's forehead was full of sweat as he nervously said, Actually, I also just found this restaurant. I was just about to try it. I'll bring you here next time." Uncle Week, don't you come here every day?" Amy was passing by with Ugly Duckling in her arms when she suddenly stopped and asked with a strange expression, "Little boss, you've misunderstood me." Vicenio's face darkened. He looked at Bonnie, whose smile was gradually becoming perverted, and stuttered as he explained, Honey, listen to me. All right, you don't have to say any more. There's plenty of time when we go back," Bonnie said magnanimously. Vicenio sighed silently in his heart. He already knew what was going to happen when he went back today. Not long after, Yabamia came over with a tray and placed the food they had ordered in front of them. "Your Ruggiamos, Yangzhou fried rice, and tofu pudding." Vicenio quickly took the 3 Ruggiamos and placed them next to his hand. Then he placed the Yangzhou fried rice and sweet tofu pudding in front of Bonnie with a smile. "Honey, here's your rainbow fried rice and sweet tofu pudding. I heard that your skin will become very good after eating this tofu pudding." Bonnie looked at Vicenio with a scrutinizing expression and said, "I was wondering why you're becoming more and more tender. So, you've been eating these supplements behind my back every day. Are you planning to find another rich woman to keep you when I'm old?" Although Vicenio was indeed a pretty boy who relied on his looks to make a living, he really didn't think that way. One Bonnie was already enough to make his legs go weak. How could he be in the mood to find another rich woman? He only ate the tofu pudding because it was really delicious. "All right, I believe you." Bonnie stared at Vicenio for a while and nodded without waiting for his explanation. Then, she picked up the spoon, scooped up a spoonful of the beautiful fried rice, and put it into her mouth. "Oh, this is such a wonderful taste." Bonnie's face lit up with amazement after just chewing. The wonderful taste of all the ingredients bloomed in this mouth, and the more she chewed, the more fragrant it became. It really made her feel so blissful. After swallowing, she couldn't help but put another spoonful into her mouth. She couldn't help but indulge in the delicious taste. Vicenio heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the blissful smile on Bonnie's face. He also picked up the Ruggiamo. The 2 layers of soft and fragrant by G bread sandwiched the tender braised meat. He bit into it, and the delicious gravy flowed out. Every taste bud on the tip of his tongue seemed to be cheering and jumping for joy. He closed his eyes and felt the blood in his body become violent, constantly repairing and filling up the holes in his body. It made him feel as if his empty body was gradually being filled up. Whispering in the pugilistic world. Chapter 1135. After finishing a bowl of delicious Yangzhou fried rice and a bowl of sweet tofu pudding, Bonnie licked her lips, and her gaze landed on the remaining Ruggiamo next to Vicenio's hand. How can she eat so fast? Vicenio was shocked. He wasn't even halfway through his second Ruggiamo. He slowly turned his body to block Bonnie's view and took another big bite of the Ruggiamo. He had to finish it quickly. "Honey, it seems that you can't finish it. Let me help you with the last one." A hand came close to his body and grabbed the Ruggiamo. "No!" Vicenio was shocked. He stared at the hand that grabbed the Ruggiamo, slowly retracted. He forced himself to look at Bonnie calmly and said, "Honey, this Ruggiamo is really not suitable for you. Why don't you have ice cream? It's also super delicious." "No, I have to try this Ruggiamo today." Bonnie shook her head. Then, she took a bite of the Ruggiamo under Vicenio's gradually widening eyes. Crunch! The crispy skin made a light, crisp sound, and the braised meat juices in the middle of the soft and sweet baiji bread splashed everywhere. Unlike the refreshing taste of the Yangzhou fried rice, this meat juices were full and domineering. It was as if a ladle of water had been splashed on boiling oil, and the taste buds were instantly activated. What was even more incredible was that after swallowing, the deliciousness bloomed in the mouth and turned into a fiery aura that wreaked havoc in the body. It was as if a little monster had entered the body, causing the entire person to become restless and hot. Bonnie's lips parted slightly, and she let out a moan of ecstasy with a slightly red face. Slash! At the same time, there was a crisp sound of cloth tearing. Bonnie's clothes were torn open, and her full breasts were almost exposed. Oh, this feeling is simply too wonderful. Bonnie wasn't aware of this at all. Her mind was only filled with this thought. After the initial stimulation of the heat in her body disappeared, she didn't feel uncomfortable. Instead, she felt warm and numb. The exhaustion from last night's and this morning's battle instantly disappeared. She even felt like she could fight another 300 rounds. "It's over." Vicenio reached out to block Bonnie's exposed chest. His mind was completely blank. He was finished today. Bonnie opened her eyes and looked at Vicenio coquettishly. She punched his chest with her little fist and said coquettishly, "Hubby, you're so naughty. How could you hide such a good thing for yourself to eat?" Vicenio wanted to cry. "I'll deal with you when we get back." Bonnie licked her lips and continued eating the Ruggiamo in her hand. I didn't expect that such a decent-looking restaurant would actually sell this kind of medicine, and it's so delicious. This boss is really a genius. Bonnie looked in the direction of the kitchen. No wonder her husband was getting better and better. It turned out that he came here every day to cheer her on. Vicenio finished the 2 Ruggiamos with a dumbfounded expression, paid the bill, and followed Bonnie out of the restaurant in a daze. "Honey, listen to me. The sun is shining brightly today. Why don't we?" Vicenio said seriously after getting on the carriage. "Why don't we play something more exciting? We haven't tried on a moving carriage yet." Bonnie smiled wickedly. She was already on top of him. Her soft and familiar hands unbuttoned his clothes, and she took off her clothes while she was at it. The coachman felt the unusual shaking of the carriage and some strange noises. He looked down and continued to drive the carriage calmly. "You want me to be the judge for the challenge?" In the Food Association building, Robert looked at Sith in surprise. Sith nodded. "Yes, Mr. Meg has already accepted my challenge, so I would like to invite you to be the main judge for this duel." The second place on the soup rankings was challenging the first place on the soup rankings. This was the first duel after the launch of the Delicious Cuisine rankings. This Delicious Cuisine rankings caused a huge commotion at the beginning because Mamie's dominated the 6 rankings. However, most of them were negative reviews and negative comments about the Delicious Cuisine rankings. However, as time passed, this sincere ranking still won the approval of the customers with one delicious dish after another. Even for Mamie Restaurant, which was the most controversial restaurant in the city, after more and more customers tried it for themselves and word of mouth spread, it completely reversed its reputation and was basically confirmed as the #1 restaurant in Chaos City. However, although Mamie's was good at everything, its soup was indeed a little weak. Robert could be considered a regular at Mamie's. He had tried the braised chicken and rice a few times, so there was no need to talk about the taste. The soup was also very delicious. However, to call it a soup, it was indeed a little difficult to say that there was only enough soup for the rice. Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup was indeed one of the best soups. Robert often went there to try it. Robert pondered for a while, and then nodded. "Since that's the case, I agreed to be the judge for this soup duel." Delicacies needed innovation. Only then could they bring more delicious food to the diners and enrich the cuisine. Appropriate competition could also promote innovation. It was undeniable that Mr. Mack was indeed a genius. Every dish had a bold and imaginative idea. His revolutionary cooking method brought a fresh feeling to the entire food and beverage industry. Since both parties had agreed, he might be able to encourage the chefs to go on the path of innovation by attending the event as the president of the Food Association. Sith's face lit up, and he quickly said, "Thank you, then." The duel will be at 4:30 p.m. today at the entrance of Mamie's. After leaving the Food Association, Sith went to visit the sharp-tongued critic, Febid. "What? You want to duel with Mr. Mack?" Febid, who was writing his script, looked up at Sith as if he was an idiot. "Is your face itching?" "Mr. Febid, Sith wanted to explain. "All right. Anyway, I have nothing to do in the afternoon. I was planning to go to Mamie's for dinner, so I'll be the judge while I'm at it." Febid interrupted Sith and continued to write his script. "Go out. I need to work." "Thank you." Sith turned and left. Although he knew Febid's character was like that, he still felt a little bloodthirsty after being mocked like that. "My freshwater seafood soup will never lose to anyone," Sith said to himself with confidence as he clenched his fists. Sith then went to look for 3 slightly famous gourmets in Chaos City and invited them to be the judges for the duel. He then returned to the restaurant to prepare for the duel. It was just past 4 p.m., and there was already a crowd outside Mamie's. However, there was only a stove and a brownish-black wine jar at the entrance of the restaurant. Chapter 1136. Is this the soup that the boss of Mamie's is going to use for the duel? Why isn't anyone watching it? Isn't it too casual? Yeah, I specially came here to cheer for Sith Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup. It's the #1 soup in my heart. It's irreplaceable. I heard that this boss is going to use a new dish to duel with Boss Sith. He's really full of confidence. There's no fragrance at all. Could it be that it's boiled water? Many of the onlookers had heard about the duel and rushed over to watch the show. At this moment, the restaurant's door was closed and not a single person could be seen. There was a stove at the entrance, and a wine jar was boiling on top of it. The onlookers were also discussing in low voices to pass the time before the duel began. The restaurant's regulars were rather calm. Although not many people tasted Buddha jumps over the wall yesterday, the fragrance that successfully lured the prisoners from the neighboring prison to break out, and the scene that caused the city lord, the lord of the city, and the warden to appear at the same time was still lingering in their minds. Please make way. Sith restaurant is here. Right at this moment, a horse-drawn carriage drove over, and the bald man shouted loudly from the carriage. Everyone made way, and the horse-drawn carriage stopped at the restaurant's door. Sith walked out of the horse-drawn carriage and was stunned when he saw the wine jar at the door. Could this be the soup that Meg was going to use to duel with him? This was the first time he had seen such a cooking vessel. Huh, he's just using some weird things to attract attention. The bald man sneered and started to move all the kitchenware from the carriage with the staff. Soon, a very professional stove was set up in front of Mamie's. There were pots, bowls, ladles, basins, all kinds of knives and kitchenware. That's right. That's what a professional chef is like. What's the big deal about setting up a jar here? Everyone's interest was piqued when they saw how the people from Sith restaurant worked. Cooking wasn't a rare thing, but cooking well was something that required a lot of skill. The same kitchenware, the same ingredients, and even the same steps, but the food made by different people would have a completely different taste. Because Sith restaurant was ranked number 2 on the soup rankings, it had jumped from a small restaurant to a new restaurant in Chaos City. The delicious freshwater seafood soup was famous. How was it made? It really made people curious. Sith glanced at the tightly shut restaurant door and withdrew his gaze. He began to check if all the kitchen utensils and condiments were prepared. He turned to the bald man and asked, "Are the ingredients ready?" "I've already informed them. They should be on their way here. Old Joseph always fishes in the cleanest waters outside the city. The quality is the best." The bald man nodded. "Boss Sith, I brought the fish and prawns you asked for." At this moment, a voice came from outside. The crowd opened up a path, and a white-haired old man with his sleeves rolled up walked in with a wooden bucket. He placed the bucket on the ground and heaved a sigh of relief. The wooden barrel was half filled with clear water. Shrimps and small fishes were swimming happily in the water, and there were more than a dozen clams at the bottom. Wow, the water is so clean, and the freshwater fish are so fresh. Did they just come up from the river? Only freshly caught freshwater fish would be so energetic. Sith restaurant really uses the freshest ingredients. You can see how fresh and clean they are. No wonder the soup is so delicious every time. People came forward to take a look and couldn't help but praise. "Old Joseph, thank you for your hard work." Sith looked at the freshwater fish in the wooden barrel and revealed a satisfied smile. The quality of Old Joseph's goods had always been the best, and this time was no exception. The bald man gave the money to Old Joseph, then carefully poured the fish and prawns in the wooden barrel into the prepared wooden basin. The stove was set up, and the ingredients were ready. Sith glanced at the time. There was still about 10 minutes to the agreed time. "Oh, is everything ready?" Robert walked in from the crowd and saw that everything was ready. His gaze landed on the wine jar at the door, and he couldn't help but be stunned. What was Mr. Mac trying to do? "There are quite a lot of people. Are you afraid that no one will know if you lose?" Febid squeezed through the crowd with some difficulty. He tidied his clothes and said with a displeased expression. A middle-aged woman wearing a white mink coat walked in with a smile and said, "The battle between the first and second place on the soup rankings. It's really a battle that I look forward to." Old Master Avis walked in with a smile and greeted Robert. "Yes, I heard that Mr. Meg has a new creation. I'm really looking forward to it." A young man in a blue robe walked in with a smile and said, "All the seniors are here. It makes me seem very out of place. Boss Sith, you didn't tell me in advance. Otherwise, how would I dare to show off in front of all the seniors?" Wow, what a luxurious lineup of judges. Mr. Robert, the president of the Food Association, Mr. Febid, the sharp-tongued food critic, Candace, who just came back from Rodu, the former head chef of Reed's Roast Pig, Old Master Avis, and Randy, who just became a special columnist for the Carnivorous magazine. This lineup is really invincible. The surrounding crowd looked at the 5 people who came in one after another and were all shocked. They didn't expect such a high-level judge to be invited for a battle like this. It seemed like Boss Sith really wanted to decide the result of this battle with authority. Robert looked at his watch and doubtfully said, "It's almost time." "Mr. Mac hasn't come out yet?" Candace looked at the tightly shut restaurant door and said with a smile, "Seems like the owner of this restaurant is a little arrogant. The judges are already here, but he still hasn't come out." Ding! Right at this moment, the restaurant door opened outwards, and Meg, who was wearing a chef's uniform, walked out. He was a little surprised to see so many people crowding around the restaurant door. Then, his gaze landed on Robert and the others standing in front of the restaurant. He smiled and said, "These are the judges for today, right?" "Yes, Mr. Mac. The judges are here, and the battle is about to start. Please provide seats for the judges," Sith said to Meg. "It's my duty." Meg smiled at the bald man who was standing at the side with a look of disdain and said, "The waitresses in my restaurant are all weak girls. Then, I'll have to trouble this strong man to help me move the tables and chairs." "Me?" The bald man was stunned and wanted to refute. "Move it. The battle is about to start," Sith said. "Yes." The bald man swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He called 2 waiters to put the tables together at the door and set up the judges' table. All the judges took their seats. Robert sat in the middle and looked at Meg and Sith and said, "Mr. Mac and Boss Sith are both great chefs with superb culinary skills. Today, we will be having a culinary battle with soup. The 5 of us will be the judges, and the winner will be decided by voting. Does either side have any objections?" Chapter 1137. No objections. Meg nodded. Sith was indeed an upright person. The judges he found were all reputable figures, so they wouldn't be too biased. No objections. Sith nodded as well. Robert raised his hand to look at his watch, and then said, "All right, according to your agreement, this culinary duel will officially begin in 3 minutes. Both parties, please get ready." Sith returned to the front of the stove and began the final preparations. The waiters and chefs of Sith Restaurant were also very nervous. After all, this concerned the reputation and future of Sith Restaurant. Success or failure depended on this. In contrast to the nervousness of the people at Sith Restaurant, it was a different scene at Mamie's. "Boss, please take a seat." Yabamiya moved a chair over, placed it beside the stove, and stood behind the chair. "Thank you." Mag nodded slightly and sat down beside the warm stove. He crossed his legs and squinted his eyes casually. This stove was quite comfortable to roast in, and there was a light aroma of charcoal and fruits. The Buddha jumps over the wall only needed to be simmered on the stove, and it would be ready when the time was up. Hence, all he had to do now was to wait. Elizabeth and the others also stood behind Meg in a neat row with relaxed expressions. Amy moved a small stool and sat beside Meg's feet with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She raised her little hand and tried to stretch Ugly Duckling towards the stove. Ugly Duckling was so scared that it hugged her little hand tightly and refused to let go, causing her to laugh happily. Anna stood at the side and carefully grabbed Ugly Duckling's swaying tail to prevent it from really flinging its tail into the stove. If that happened, it would really become very ugly. I say, is this really a proper culinary duel? Why do I feel that the boss and employees of Mamie's are here to watch the show? This boss is quite honest. These waitresses are too beautiful, aren't they? They are really winners in life. But those 2 Lolas are too cute, aren't they? Ah, that kitten is so pitiful. Please change it to me. Outside Amy's, there were no less than 500 onlookers. Most of them were waiting in line to eat, while the rest were there to watch the show after hearing about the duel. However, everyone was rather surprised to see Amy and the others. Of course, most of them were looking at Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling, and Anna, who was standing off to the side. The cute little Lolita paired with the cute round kitten really made people unable to take their eyes off of them. The women standing behind Meg in a neat row also made people's eyes light up. They looked at Meg with eyes full of envy and jealousy. Because his performance was too leisurely, it even gave people the illusion that they were the real spectators. But he was clearly the main character of this duel, wasn't he? Candace looked at Meg, who was crossing his legs, and said with a displeased expression, "This head chef of Mamie's is quite ostentatious. The duel is about to start, and not only is he not preparing, he even set up a chair for himself." In order to be known as the queen of cookery in Rendezvous, Candace had put in much more effort than any man. Step by step, she walked out of the doubt and ridicule, and became one of the top 10 chefs in Rendezvous with influence. As a person of action, she couldn't stand those frivolous chefs. These fellows usually had more temper than ability and couldn't achieve much. And now, Meg's performance was arrogance and disdain for this duel in her eyes. This was a very frivolous performance. Has he already given up on this duel? Avis also showed a hint of doubt as he looked at Meg, puzzled. "I think this boss is an interesting person. He's someone who knows how to enjoy life," Randy said with a smile. A smile appeared on Randy's face. His gaze landed on the 4 waitresses with different styles standing behind Meg, and his smile became even more radiant. Dining in this restaurant must be a delightful experience for the eyes. Sith glanced at the leisurely Meg, and his gaze landed on the wine jar on the stove at the side. Meg had told him before that the soup he was going to make would take a long time to cook, so he would start cooking in advance. He had already informed him of this in advance. It seemed like this jar contained the soup he was going to use to duel with him today. He only knows how to put on an act. Let's see if he can still sleep when he loses. The bald man mumbled softly as he looked at Meg unhappily. "Change the water and get ready to cook," Sith said calmly as he retracted his gaze. He was faintly uneasy. Although he was very confident in his ancestral freshwater seafood soup, he suddenly felt uncertain when he saw Meg's relaxed expression. What is this new product that this fellow is launching? Is it really better than the braised chicken soup from before? Mr. Meg is a humble and polite person. He's also a chef who treasures cooking. Boss Sith told me before that the soup Mr. Meg is going to cook would take a long time, so he would start cooking in advance. This is something that both parties have no objections to, Robert explained with a smile. Candace smiled coldly and said with slight mockery, "Since the timing is not equal, then this is not a fair duel. I've never heard of such a strange duel of culinary skills. Who can guarantee that this soup was made by him? Then what's the point of this duel? Yeah, isn't this too unfair? Boss Sith hasn't started cooking yet, and that boss has already started cooking. Yeah, who knows who made this pot of soup? Maybe it was made by someone else." The culinary queen really saw the problem with one look. Candace's speech stirred up the enthusiasm and curiosity of the spectators. They all started to find loopholes and construct conspiracy theories. These fellows, how can they talk nonsense? This was clearly made by the boss alone. Yabamiya looked at Candace with some annoyance. This woman was a judge. If she stood on Sith's side before watching the duel, that would be terrible. Mamie's regulars were all unhappy when they heard that. Mr. Mac looking for someone else to cook for him. This is probably the funniest joke I've heard this year, right? Harrison could not help but laugh. His words also caused the regulars of Mamie's to burst into laughter. Sitting by the fire, Meg, who was so comfortable that he almost fell asleep, opened his eyes. He looked at Candace with a smile and said, "Madam, before you understand the situation, I suggest you watch your words." This duel was initiated by Boss Sith. He proposed the format and theme of the duel. I set the time and place, and clearly told the other party that the soup I'm cooking will take more than 5 hours. In order not to waste everyone's time, I will start cooking in advance. As for inviting someone else to cook for me, please be clear-headed. This is a duel between the first and second place of the soup leaderboard, and Mamie's is first. May I ask, which chef should I invite to cook this pot of soup on my behalf to face this duel where the honor of a chef is at stake? Chapter 1138. The chattering stopped in an instant, and there was silence at the entrance of Mamie's restaurant. The onlookers who were discussing the unfairness of the competition and how Mamie might have cheated shut their mouths one by one, feeling their faces burning. Candace was stunned for a moment. Meg's words were like a loud slap to her face, mocking her intelligence without hiding it. The anger in her heart burned fiercely. But as he said, since this was a duel between the first and second place, if he could find a chef better than Sith to replace him, then Sith would still not be first place. And the rules of the culinary duel were that as long as both parties agreed, then it would be established. In this aspect, Meg did not leave any loopholes. Candace was angry, but she could not vent it. Her wrinkled face was red with anger. She looked at the wine jar and sneered. "I have been cooking for 40 years, and I have never heard of a soup that takes more than 5 hours to cook. Even the tendons of magical beasts don't take that long to cook." Meg smiled and said, "It's okay. Maybe you don't understand what kind of soup takes more than 5 hours to cook, and you have never tried the deliciousness of a soup made by boiling bones over low heat for a few hours. But if a chef uses his own experience to casually mock the cooking methods of other chefs, it does not make him appear knowledgeable and authoritative. There are many things you have never heard of." Candace was so angry that her whole body trembled. As a senior in the culinary world, chefs were usually very respectful when they saw her. She had agreed to be the judge of this duel just now because she saw that Sith's attitude was sincere enough. She did not expect to be mocked by a young junior. Meg ignored Candace and turned to look at Robert. "It's time for the duel. Considering that boss Sith's time is tight, let's start the duel first." "Okay, let the duel officially begin." Robert nodded and ended this quarrel that had arisen out of nowhere. "Madam Candace, calm down. Let's focus on the duel first." Robert turned to look at Candace, who was sitting beside him, and comforted her softly. This kind of ungentlemanly fellow will definitely not be able to cook any delicious food." Candace snorted coldly. She had already made up her mind. No matter what soup Meg made, she would definitely vote for Sith. After returning to Chaos City, the only meal she'd had outside was the freshwater seafood soup at Sith Restaurant. It had indeed given her quite a pleasant surprise. Even in Rodu, just the soup alone was enough to rank in the top 10. This boss is quite impressive. His sharp-tongued style is sharp enough, yet it doesn't lose the elegance of a gentleman. He kills without leaving a trace, and chokes people to death without paying for it. Randy looked at Meg in awe. He was really a genius. He hadn't handed in the draft for this month's Mediterraneanism column yet. He had been cooped up at home for a month, and even after scratching his head, he still couldn't find any ideas. Today, he agreed to be a judge for Boss Sith because he wanted to go out to find some inspiration. At the same time, he also planned to check the meat rankings on the gourmet cuisine rankings. He only found out today that the gourmet cuisine rankings had changed. This guy, is he trying to steal my rice bowl? Febed looked at Meg with more scrutiny and a sense of danger. Such a sharp rebuke made him feel as though he had met a kindred spirit. Mr. Mac is indeed Mr. Mac. The dishes are delicious, and the words he says are so nice. Haha, I have already become Mr. Mac's little fangirl. The regulars at Mamie's cheered up after Meg tore Candace apart with his bare hands. They were also full of confidence. This guy is even going against the judges. Looks like we're definitely going to win today. The bald man was secretly delighted. There was no need to worry. Candace's vote already belonged to Sith Restaurant. Sith took a deep look at Meg, and his mood became even more serious. He retracted his gaze and took a deep breath to calm himself down. He took out a pair of scissors and started to cut the fish and prawns that were still alive and started to cook the freshwater seafood soup. Seeing that Candace didn't say anything, Meg also closed his eyes again. After a while, he opened his eyes again and turned to the ladies. Are you all hungry? Why don't we eat first? The ladies were all stunned. Let's eat. Amy, who was playing with Ugly Duckling with Anna, suddenly stood up and nodded her little head. Me. Father, I want to eat. Anyway, there's still half an hour. Let's eat first. We'll be opening soon. It's not good to work on an empty stomach. Meg nodded, got up, and walked into the restaurant. The ladies also followed him into the restaurant. This is too showy, isn't it? Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw the people from Mamie's leave in a group to eat. Arrogant. Absolutely arrogant, Candace said coldly. She had never heard of a contestant who left the judges to the side and went to eat by himself. Yeah, he didn't even bring us along. It's really too despicable. Febid stretched out his head and shouted at Meg's back. Mr. Mac, bring me along. It's not opening hours yet. Please line up. Meg's calm voice sounded. The door closed slowly, leaving behind a crowd of shocked gazes. The dishes were already prepared. Mia and the others went into the kitchen to bring them out. Everyone sat down and started eating. Boss, is this a good idea? Will they all vote for that person because of this? Mia said worriedly. It's okay. The duel is a small matter. There's no need to affect our normal meals and business because of this. Meg put a piece of fish into Amy's bowl and continued eating. There might be more and more such challenges in the future, but Meg had already decided to reject such meaningless duels. Instead of wasting time and energy on such things, he would rather play with Amy. Outside the restaurant, hundreds of people were watching a strange cooking duel. On one side, in front of a professional stove, Boss Sith was skillfully killing the fish and removing the shrimp lines. A pot of freshwater seafood soup with a strong aroma attracted the audience's exclamations. On the other side, there was a stove all by itself. On top of the stove was a large brown wine jar. There was no viewing experience at all. What is this? Is this a one-man show? A confused passerby poked his head in to watch for a while and asked curiously. I guess so. A passerby who had been watching for a long time nodded. He still could not understand this mysterious duel. Many people even thought that the boss of Amy's had given up on this duel. As time passed, Sith lifted the lid of the soup pot. The rich and fresh aroma immediately spread out. The boiling milky white soup was sprinkled with a handful of green onions. He turned off the fire and scooped out the soup. Bowls of steaming freshwater seafood soup were served in front of the 5 judges. It smells so good. Everyone's eyes were attracted to the bowls of freshwater seafood soup. Ding! At this moment, the bell hanging on the door of the restaurant made a crisp sound. The door opened, and Meg walked out with a calm expression. Come, wonderful bookhouse. Come. Chapter 1139. Watching the process of a chef's cooking had a wonderful effect. When the lid was lifted, the aroma satisfied all the audience's imaginations. Although they did not taste it, they seemed to be certain that it was a very delicious and tempting taste. At that moment, the audience and the 5 judges felt this way. The milky white freshwater seafood soup emitted a tempting fresh aroma. The fresh taste of the fresh fish and shrimp was completely stimulated by the secret seasoning. It was pleasantly surprising and satisfying. The crisp sound of the bell woke everyone up. Everyone looked at Meg, who walked out of the restaurant. Because he went to eat halfway, they almost forgot that this was a cooking competition. Looks like Boss Sith's freshwater seafood soup is done. Meg glanced at the big bowl of freshwater seafood soup in front of the judges and then looked at the audience's expression. His way of leaving to eat did not seem to be very popular. This boss's behavior is really rude. Yeah, first he insulted the judges, then he left to eat halfway through the competition. Now Boss Sith's freshwater seafood soup is in front of the judges. What does he have to compete with him? Yeah, the aroma of this freshwater seafood soup is too tempting. Pure wild freshwater seafood with fresh ingredients. I've decided to go to Sith restaurant to have a bowl of freshwater seafood soup later. The audience discussed softly. They did not think that Meg could win. Mr. Mac, this bowl is for you. Sith walked over with a bowl of fish soup and handed it to Meg. Meg glanced at Sith. It looked like this person was really confident in his freshwater seafood soup. Was he planning to make him admit defeat? If that was the case, then wouldn't he have to return the favor with a bowl? Wouldn't that be too cruel? Meg showed a hint of hesitation. I think, no matter the result, it should be acknowledged by the other party, Sith said with a smile. Meg reached out to take the bowl of fish soup and nodded with a smile. Boss Sith is right. However, my soup is also coming out of the pot. Let's drink together later. As he said that, he carefully put the bowl of fish soup on the table at the side. This freshwater seafood soup is milky white in color. It's thick but not thick. It perfectly stimulates the freshwater seafood's taste and blends them into this pot of soup. It's really the best soup. Candace lowered his head and sniffed. He then picked up the spoon and scooped up a spoonful of freshwater seafood soup. He gently blew on it a few times before putting it into his mouth. The warm freshwater seafood soup had a warm texture. Although it was not Candace's first time tasting it, he still could not help but praise. The freshness of the freshwater fish, the softness of the clams, the deliciousness of the river prawns, all in one mouthful of soup perfectly. Yet, it has a unique taste. And surprise, it's really delicious. Wow, the legendary cold-faced cooking queen actually gave such a high evaluation. Looks like Boss Sith is really going to win this time. Someone exclaimed softly. Febid picked up his spoon and drank a spoonful of soup. He savored the taste for a while before nodding slightly. The soup is a little bland, and the seasoning is still lacking. However, it does have its own uniqueness when it comes to stimulating the taste of the ingredients. In terms of freshwater seafood alone, no one in Chaos City can beat it. It can be considered a good soup. The gourmet Febid, who is known for his sharp tongue, actually gave Boss Sith such a high evaluation. Seems like this vote is in the bag. The bald man mumbled to himself excitedly, as if he could already see the light of victory. Boss Sith's culinary skills are as stable as usual. This bowl of freshwater seafood soup is really something I can't get tired of. Although the fish and prawns in winter are not as plump as in autumn, the texture is clearer and has a different taste. It's a good soup. Robert also nodded and praised after drinking a few mouthfuls of soup. Old Master Avis drank a few mouthfuls of soup and smiled at Sith. The best freshwater seafood soup in Rodu is the freshwater seafood soup from Roosevelt Restaurant. It was once awarded the best dish in the Roth Empire's Palace Banquet. This freshwater seafood soup made by head chef, Sith, is already 80% standard. If he makes some improvements to the side dishes and condiments, it's not impossible for it to surpass Roosevelt Restaurant's freshwater seafood soup one day. The president and Old Master Avis also gave him very high praises, for judges have already expressed their approval for him. Is the result of this duel already out? Everyone turned to look at Randy. How would this young food critic rate this freshwater seafood soup? This won't do. These judges seem to be very satisfied with this bowl of freshwater seafood soup. Is Mr. Mac really going to lose? The regulars at Mamie's also had a tinge of nervousness on their faces. Although they were very confident in Mr. Mac's culinary skills, it seemed like he was also an opponent that could not be underestimated. Boss should win, right? Mia clenched her fists nervously. Although Meg had never lost before, the current situation was really too nerve-wracking. Don't worry. Father is super awesome. He will definitely win, Amy said confidently as she looked at Meg, who was lowering the temperature of the stove. Yes, Uncle Meg is the best chef. Anna nodded her little head and looked at Meg with admiration in her eyes. I'll be proud if you praise me like this. Meg turned to look at the two little ones with a smile. He was in a good mood as he put on a pair of gloves and prepared to remove the lid. On the other side, Randy also picked up his chopsticks and smilingly said, "The seniors have all commented on the soup. As a carnivore who can't be happy without meat, I'll try the freshwater seafood in this soup first." As he said that, he picked up a small fish. Although it had been cooked in the soup for a long time, the fish meat did not fall apart and still maintained the appearance of a whole fish. He put the small fish into a small bowl and then picked up a piece of fish meat to put into his mouth. Because it was cooked in the soup, the taste of the fish meat is very bland. Also, it should have been cooked for too long, so the fish meat is a little dry. After that, he scooped a spoonful of soup and then put a piece of fish meat into the soup and put it into his mouth along with the soup. This is indeed much better. The soup is very rich and makes up for the bland fish meat perfectly. Furthermore, this soup is richer and more delicious than I expected. If I were to only comment on the soup, it's indeed the most delicious soup I've ever had in Chaos City. Next, let's try the river prawns. Stir-fried river prawns are my favorite dish. I wonder how the river prawns in this soup taste. Let's tear off its head first, then squeeze out its intestines and peel off its soft shell. Now, Mr. Mack has removed the lid. Right at this moment, someone suddenly exclaimed. A rich, meaty aroma suddenly appeared, and then swept out in all directions like a wave. Everyone who was listening with relish couldn't help but look over. Chapter 1140. Oh my God, it smells so good. Everyone's gaze landed on the big wine jar on the stove at the entrance of the restaurant. The sealed jar had been opened, and the incredible aroma was coming from that jar. New, thinking Chinese-style hands, if the freshwater seafood soup's aroma was tempting, then this aroma was amazing. It came from nothing with just the act of opening the lid. The rich aroma overflowed and almost instantly covered the freshwater seafood soup's aroma. Seafood, meat, mushrooms, and the faint aroma of wine. It was a wonderful combination, but it brought about an incredible aroma that made people fall into it immediately. The onlookers who were mocking earlier all shut their mouths and swallowed their saliva as they looked at the wine jar beside Meg. What's inside? Why is it giving off such a wonderful aroma? How can this be? The bald man opened his mouth wide. Although he didn't want to admit it, the aroma that kept entering his nose had destroyed most of his confidence. Is this Buddha jumps over the wall? The aroma is indeed above the freshwater seafood soup. However, soup is ultimately a competition of taste. Sith slowly clenched his fist and muttered to himself. His gaze was already a little nervous. This aroma, it's too outstanding. Randy forgot to put the peeled river prawns into his mouth. He opened his mouth slightly and unconsciously stretched his neck to look in the direction of the wine jar. This aroma, how is it possible? Candace, who was drinking soup with his head lowered, suddenly raised his head and looked at Meg in disbelief. Robert, Febid, Avis, and the rest also stopped eating and looked in Meg's direction in shock. They were obviously shocked by the aroma. Boss, do you really want to use this small bowl? Isn't it too small? Yabamiya came forward with a stack of small bowls and asked softly. They're not paying. A small bowl is enough, Meg said softly without batting an eyelid. He took the small bowls and started scooping the soup. 6 small bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall were scooped up. There were 4 small pieces of ingredients in each bowl, and each bowl was different. Send it to the judges and Boss Sith. Meg put down the spoon and smiled at everyone. Buddha jumps over the wall. Please try it. Bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall soup were placed in front of the judges, and the last bowl was given to Sith. Meg picked up the bowl of freshwater seafood soup that Sith had passed to him earlier and gestured to him. Then, he scooped up a spoonful and took a sip. The taste was warm and fragrant. The freshness of freshwater seafood was perfectly unleashed, and there was no fishy smell at all. It was indeed a good bowl of soup, better than most chefs. Good soup. Mag gave Sith a thumbs up before putting the bowl aside. He was too full just now, and couldn't finish another bowl of soup. The corner of Sith's mouth twitched. He glanced at the bowl that Meg had put aside. He couldn't tell if Meg's words were sincere praise or just polite words. The bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall was placed in front of the judges. Compared to the big bowl of freshwater seafood soup, the small bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall seemed a little small. It was probably only about 1/5 of the freshwater seafood soup. Although the fragrance of this soup is tempting, isn't this boss too stingy? He actually only gave such a small bowl. A passerby couldn't help but complain. However, most people's gazes were focused on the 5 judges at this moment. Both sides had already presented the soup, and the winner of this battle was in the hands of the judges. This soup, how exactly is it made? Candace looked at the brown soup in the small bowl in front of her with a puzzled expression. There was a transparent shark's fin in the soup, a piece that seemed to be chicken, a piece that seemed to be some kind of fungus, and a piece of meat that she didn't know what it was. She had stayed in Rodu for more than 40 years, and most of the chefs were her friends. She had also tasted countless delicacies, but she had never seen a soup that was so invasive just by its fragrance. Furthermore, this kind of invasiveness didn't make her feel disgusted. Instead, she had the urge to surrender when she came into contact with it and let it face her directly. Of course, this kind of wording wasn't very appropriate, but this was how she felt now. The seemingly messy combination perfectly blended into an irresistible and wonderful fragrance. This was really too unbelievable. Soup had always been seen as a side dish on the dining table. However, if there was a table of dishes in front of her now, even if it was a palace banquet, the fragrance of this soup had already made it the absolute main character. Previously, Meg's arrogant behavior made her have a very bad impression of him, but this soup in front of her made her want to give it a try uncontrollably. As a fair judge, it's my duty to taste. Then, I'll force myself to give it a try. Candace convinced herself in her heart. Then, she picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of soup in her mouth. The delicious soup slowly seeped into her taste buds. Then, like a storm, it set off a crazy 30 octaves. The freshness of the seafood, the mellowness of the meat, the freshness of the fungus. All kinds of flavors appeared one by one and played an intoxicating symphony on the tip of the tongue. Oh, what an incredible taste! How did the taste of so many ingredients fuse into such a small mouthful of soup? Not only is it not abrupt at all, but the rich layering is addictive. This is simply a master-level cooking skill. It's amazing. After swallowing the soup, Candace couldn't help but praise. As soon as the words left her mouth, she felt that it was a little inappropriate. However, looking at the wonderful bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall in front of her, she really couldn't say anything against her will. That would be blasphemy to her belief and the career that she had persevered for decades. The surrounding crowd was silent for a while, and all of them were surprised. The culinary queen was bluntly criticized by Meg before. Now, she was praising Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall. Wasn't this too unbelievable? Mr. Mac really never disappoints. Febid looked at the small bowl in front of him. His eyes were glistening with tears as he scooped up a spoonful of soup and put it into his mouth. In his career, he had experienced a Waterloo once. That was during the duel between Meg and Ricky. As an outstanding, sharp-tongued critic, he could only complain that his boss was too stingy. That made him have a lot of doubts about his career. Because of that, he had stopped writing for a week. Then, he regrouped and decided to go to Amy's to pick a fight to regain his confidence. From that day onwards, every day was a Waterloo for him. The Waterloo felt good for a while, but it kept on going. Until now, he still could only conclude one thing. Mr. Mac was too stingy. This was really hopeless. The delicious soup swept through his taste buds. The rich layering of the dozens of ingredients was amazing, and the combination of the delicious taste was addictive. It was like wandering in a warm spring, so comfortable that he wanted to sleep. Sure enough, Mr. Mac is still too stingy. Febid opened his eyes and looked at the small bowl with tears streaming down his face. Whispers of the World. Chapter 1141. This must be the pinnacle of soups. An unsurpassable pinnacle, Febid praised as he sipped the soup carefully, afraid that he would spill a little. Mr. Febid, who is known for his sharp tongue, actually gave such an evaluation. That's unbelievable. Everyone was shocked when they heard that. Those who were familiar with Febid's style of food criticism found it even more unbelievable. See that? I told you Mr. Mac would definitely win. I tried that Buddha jumps over the wall with my own mouth last night. That taste. TSK, TSK. It's really memorable, Harrison said proudly to the crazed fan of the freshwater seafood soup beside him. The crazed fan, who had been feeling smug for a while, snorted coldly. He obviously felt guilty and said, "Humph, there's still 3 people. It's not certain who will win yet. Seems like Mr. Meg's new dish has made an outstanding innovation again." Robert's eyes lit up too. During this period of time, there had been a phenomenon of people imitating and learning from Mamie's cooking methods in Chaos City and developing new dishes and delicacies. Chaos City's culinary world, which had stagnated for many years without any progress and innovation, was entering an era of blossoming flowers. Although there were no stunning and phenomenal delicacies yet, this phenomenon was very good. It was also full of surprises for the diners, as they could discover more and more new dishes on the menu. A solo dance that led the trend of delicacies had never happened in the history of Chaos City or even the history of the Northern continent. Mr. Meg might become a man who would go down in history because of his delicacies. He scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth, and his eyes became brighter and brighter. The delicious soup was full of meatiness, but it was not greasy at all. The distinct layers were amazing. He wanted to analyze the flavors one by one, but there were simply too many of them. There were even some that he had never seen before. After swallowing, the Buddha jumps over the wall. Robert smilingly said, "Seems like there will be a change in the next delicious cuisine rankings." Avis also drank a mouthful of soup. The scrumptiousness of the Buddha jumps over the wall bloomed in his mouth. It had a strong impact and shocked him. The younger generation will surpass us in time. Avis looked at Meg and praised him in his heart. He had also placed Mamie's at the top of the meat rankings. Both the red braised pork and the Peking duck had shocked him greatly. Meg's culinary skills and unique culinary thinking had far surpassed the chefs of this era, including these old fellows who had been immersed in the kitchen for decades. If this soup appeared at the Roth Empire's King's Palace banquet, it would definitely be chosen as the best dish of the banquet. Mr. Meg's understanding and creativity in cooking is truly admirable. Avis praised sincerely as he looked at Meg. "You flatter me." Meg cupped his hands and said modestly, "President, are you saying that Mr. Max Buddha jumps over the wall is going to reach the top?" Old Master Avis just said that the freshwater seafood soup has a promising future, but now he's saying that Mr. Max Buddha jumps over the wall is the best dish at the palace banquet. Isn't the difference too obvious? Although the final vote hasn't been held yet, it seems like the tables have turned. Haha, Mr. Max's ability isn't for show. The onlookers discussed fervently. Sith held the small bowl in his hand with a pale face. "B-boss, we won't lose, right?" The bald man asked softly as he looked at Sith anxiously. He no longer looked as smug and confident as before. "It's an unexpectedly high evaluation. What's interesting is that the ingredients in each judge's bowl are different even though it's the same bowl of soup. Then, let's follow the rules just now. I'll try the meat in this soup first and see how it tastes." Randy put the previously peeled river prawns back into the freshwater seafood soup and scooped out a piece of meat from the bowl with a spoon. "Looks like this is a piece of chicken. There's indeed a strong chicken broth taste in the soup. I wonder how this chicken will taste after being cooked for a long time." As Randy spoke, he put the cubed chicken into his mouth. The most important thing about cooking meat was the control of the fire. If it was cooked for too long, the meat would turn dry easily, or it would lose its original chewiness and taste because it was too soft. As an exquisite carnivore, Randy's requirements for meat were almost perverted. In order to find meat that he was satisfied with, he had once carried his backpack and traveled almost all over the Northern continent. This was also the reason why he could become the youngest columnist for Carnivore in just a year. Readers often said that his words had a soul. He was a true carnivore. According to his experience, meat that had been cooked for such a long time had already lost its taste and texture. He bit into the chicken, and it didn't have the mushy texture that he expected. Instead, it had the perfect amount of tenderness and smoothness. What was even more incredible was the rich, meaty taste that came with it. It wasn't just the taste of the chicken. The aroma of wine, seafood, mushrooms, and all kinds of meat had merged together and permeated the chicken perfectly. There was flavor within flavor. It was mushy but not rotten when chewed, and the aftertaste was endless. Randy felt his scalp starting to go numb. This had completely overturned his understanding of meat. He had never seen food like this before. His taste buds were already going crazy as they welcomed this wonderful carnival. He almost chewed his tongue. After swallowing a piece of chicken, he felt like he hadn't had enough. "I can't find the words to describe this feeling anymore. Even compared to all the meats that I've tasted in the past, this meat can be ranked in the top 3. What's even more incredible is that I actually encountered it in a bowl of soup. This world is too crazy." Randy was full of admiration. He looked at Meg with a smile and said, "I think I already know what to write for this month's column. Mr. Meg, I really have to thank you." "You're welcome." Meg nodded slightly. He couldn't stand these so-called food critics the most. He hoped that they would also become chefs in their next lives. Randy retracted his gaze and scooped up a piece of transparent shark's fin with a spoon. After studying it for a while, he tried to put it into his mouth. The smooth shark's fin slid into his mouth almost instantly. The shark's fin that was soaked in soup had a very wonderful texture and a wonderful taste. It gave him a completely different experience from the chicken. The 5 judges were all carefully tasting the small bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall. The big bowl of freshwater seafood soup at the side was completely ignored. Ding! Febed's spoon was the first to touch the bottom. He raised his head and poured the last few drops of soup into his mouth. He put down the bowl and looked at Meg. Mr. Mac, another bowl. Come. Wonderful bookhouse. Come. Chapter 1142. I want another bowl, too. Randy put down his bowl and raised his hand as well. He added with a smile, Can you give me a few more pieces of meat? Candace put down her spoon and wiped her lips elegantly with a silk handkerchief. She glanced at Meg, and her throat moved. However, she held it in and didn't say anything. She was secretly anxious. If they can all have another bowl, I should have one too, right? Robert and Avis put down their bowls. Although they didn't say anything, their gazes were on Meg. Meg smiled and said, I'm sorry. I only prepared this much for the judges. The rest is for the customers. If you still want to eat, you can line up and try in the restaurant. Mr. Mac, aren't you too stingy? There's still so much in that jar. Even a small bowl would be fine. Febed looked at Meg with some resentment, expressing his disdain for his stingy behavior. Because the cost is higher, so... Meg shrugged. His expression said everything. Then he continued, I think the bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall just now is enough for the judges to make a judgment for this duel. Forget it. I don't have high expectations for you. I'll order a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall. Febed sighed. A gourmet duel where the judges didn't even provide meals could only happen to Meg. However, every time he heard that there was Mr. Mac, he couldn't help but want to try it. This feeling was too sullen. This boss really has a personality. Randy wasn't annoyed. Instead, he looked at Meg with some interest. He raised his hand and said, Then, I'll order a bowl in advance too. I'll go in and eat later. Robert raised his hand to signal for everyone to be quiet. Then, he said loudly, All right, since we've all tasted the soup made by Sith and Mr. Mac, it's time to make a judgment for this duel. Who will win in the end? I'm so nervous. What's there to be nervous about? The advantage of Buddha jumps over the wall is too obvious. That's not necessarily true. Didn't the culinary queen get scolded by the boss just now? Maybe she'll vote for Boss Sith. Although the surroundings were much quieter, there were still many people whispering. There was also a hint of anticipation and nervousness on the faces of the members of Amy's team. The final result was about to be revealed, and the victor would be decided. The bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup in Sith's hand hadn't been touched. Although his expression was still calm, his trembling hand that was holding onto the bowl showed that he wasn't calm at all. The bald man and the people from Sith restaurant all had very nervous expressions on their faces. They looked at Sith, then at the judges. If they lost this competition, then they would become laughingstocks. Mr. Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall really amazed me. It's hard to imagine that meat could be cooked so deliciously in a pot of soup. It completely subverted my understanding of cooking. Hence, I'm voting for Mr. Meg. Randy raised his hand and pointed at Meg. Boss Sith's freshwater seafood soup has always been making subtle improvements. This is very rare among chefs. Today's performance can be considered perfect. The taste of the soup is fresh and delicious. It's really a delicacy. Febed looked at Sith and praised. Then, he raised his hand and pointed at Meg. Hence, I'm voting for Mr. Mac. 2 votes. The expressions of the audience suddenly became nervous. According to the rules, the winner of the competition would be decided by the number of votes. Whoever got 3 votes first would be considered the winner. Candace coughed softly, and everyone's gaze fell on her. Before the competition started, she had a small argument with Meg. Everyone was curious whether this would be the turning point of this competition. Please, you must vote for Boss Sith. The bald man put his hands together and prayed sincerely. If he lost the competition, his plan to become the new branch manager would be completely ruined. Meg also looked at Candace. This old lady with a strong aura and the pride of chef might go against her will and choose Sith. However, if that was the case, then he would be too disappointed in her. I really admire Sith's humility and diligence. Back then, his great-grandfather had brought me into the chef profession. At that time, the freshwater seafood soup he made was already very well received. When I returned to Chaos City this time, I especially want to try Sith's freshwater seafood soup. I was initially worried that after 3 generations, the heritage would be lost, and it would become ordinary. However, to my surprise, that didn't happen. Sith's freshwater seafood soup retained his grandfather's essence, but there were obvious improvements in the taste and details. This bowl of freshwater seafood soup has become a good soup that will leave its name in the world of chefs. Candace looked at Sith with a gratified smile on her face. Sith was slightly taken aback. Although he knew that his family had some connection with Candace, he didn't know that she had followed his great-grandfather into the family. After hearing her evaluation, he felt warmth in his heart. He found recognition for the career that he had been working on for his whole life. He bowed slightly and said, "Thank you." Candace retracted her gaze and looked at Meg. There was a hint of scrutiny in her eyes, and her voice became colder as she said, "I have never liked people who don't respect their elders. However, I can't deny that this Buddha jumps over the wall that Mr. Meg made is indeed better than any soup that I have ever tasted. Furthermore, I might not be able to taste a soup that is better than this in the future. This vote comes from the sincerity of a chef. I will vote for him." "Thank you." Meg nodded slightly. He was a little surprised. He didn't expect that, after playing the family card, she would vote for him. He was surprised by this move. 3 o'clock. The winner of the competition has been decided. The regulars at Amy's were already celebrating. The hardcore fans of Sith's restaurant didn't look too good. The restaurant and dish that they liked didn't win, so they were naturally in a bad mood. What should we do?" The bald man had already lost his composure. He was the one who instigated Sith to come for this challenge. He thought that he would definitely win this duel, but he didn't expect to suffer such a crushing defeat. Mr. Meg's creativity and ability in cooking have already surpassed all the chefs that I have ever seen. He has a miraculous ability that is similar to a magic caster. Just like how I can't understand how to cook such a delicious soup by putting dozens of ingredients into a big pot like stewing. Avis looked at Meg with a smile and said, "Although my vote doesn't affect the result, I will vote for Mr. Meg this time. Perhaps all the chefs in Rodu should be thankful that Mr. Meg didn't stay in the palace. Otherwise, there would be no suspense for the Best Dish Award in the future. Boss Sith and Mr. Meg are both extremely outstanding chefs in Chaos City. It is precisely because of chefs like you that the customers in Chaos City can eat more and more delicious food," Robert said as he pointed at Meg. Robert raised his hand and pointed at Meg. "However, Mr. Mag's Buddha jumps over the wall is indeed better today. I will give my vote to Mr. Mag." Chapter 1143. 5:0. Mr. Mac won in a crushing manner. Congratulations to Buddha Jumps Over the Wall for winning the first place on the soup rankings. The regulars at Amy's were not stingy with their applause as they celebrated this crushing victory. Although the victory was within their expectations, they still felt relieved after the result was confirmed. They all congratulated Meg. The onlookers also applauded. It was undeniable that this was an exciting duel. "Is this Buddha Jumps Over the Wall really that delicious? Eve, I want to have a bowl of it. Why don't we eat here tonight?" "Sure. I brought all my savings out today. I'll treat you guys to Buddha Jumps Over the Wall," a skinny man said generously, and his friends praised him. "Then I'll probably be chopped up by your wife." Harrison looked at that man pitifully. It was the tragedy of a married man. It was still better for a single man like him to be free. The surroundings were noisy. Sith felt lost as he stared at the bowl of Buddha Jumps Over the Wall in his hand and fell into deep thought. The bald man and the staff of Sith's restaurant had already lost their backbone. They looked at Sith, but did not dare to say anything. They had never thought that the freshwater seafood soup would suffer such a crushing defeat in the soup category. Meg smiled as he replied to the congratulations. He looked at Sith. He was probably the one who suffered the most in this duel. However, he did not know if he would sink because of this. There were not many good chefs in Chaos City. This boss Sith, who specialized in freshwater seafood soup, was one of them. Robert and the rest also looked at Sith with a hint of worry in their eyes. Most of the people who had reached the pinnacle of being a chef had their own pride. Whether Sith could accept his defeat in this duel might affect how far he could go on the path of being a chef. Sith was silent for a long time. Just as Robert was about to stand up and say something, he scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth and then closed his eyes. The warm soup, the aroma of wine, chicken, mushrooms, seafood, all kinds of flavors appeared one after another, and Sith's furrowed brows slowly relaxed. After a while, Sith opened his eyes and looked at Meg. He said, "Mr. Meg's soup is indeed better than the freshwater seafood soup. I admit defeat. Thank you for letting me win." Meg cupped his hands. "I think I'll come and challenge Mr. Meg again, but it might be many years later," Sith said with a smile. "Then I'll wait for Boss Sith." Meg also smiled. It seemed that not only was Boss Sith not dispirited, but he had also gained a new fighting spirit. This was a good thing. Sith finished the soup and meat in a few mouthfuls and passed the bowl to Mia. He then turned to the bald man and said, "Hand over 10,000 copper coins to Mr. Meg. Put the things away. I'll head back first." After he finished speaking, he bowed slightly to the judges and then turned to walk towards the carriage that was parked not far away. The bald man took out his money pouch and took out 10 dragon coins to give to Meg. He then instructed the waiters to put away the kitchen utensils and prepare to leave dejectedly. He no longer had the arrogance from before. "Wait, I'll have to trouble everyone to put the table back to its original position," Meg said with a smile as he put away the money and called out to everyone. "This guy, he's too much." The bald man clenched his teeth and looked at Meg. However, he still led the waiters to move the table back to its original position. After the duel ended, the crowd that was watching the show started to disperse. There were also many passers-by who were stunned by Meg's Buddha jumps over the wall and joined the queue, wanting to try the highly praised delicacy. "Judges, thank you for your hard work. The restaurant is already open for business, so please forgive me for not being able to serve you," Meg said to the judges. He then turned around and walked up the stairs to open the restaurant's door. He looked at the customers who were still queuing up and smiled. "Welcome to Mamie's. All right, let's queue up. We still have to make arrangements for today's Buddha jumps over the wall. Otherwise, I will not be able to sleep tonight." Febid clapped his hands and consciously walked to the back of the queue. "Senior Febid, it seems like you are a regular customer of Mamie's. Other than the Buddha jumps over the wall, do they have any other good meat dishes?" Randy asked curiously as he caught up with Febid. "Kid, are you trying to snatch my material?" Febid turned around and looked at Randy with a scrutinizing look. "Why would I? You and I have two completely different styles." Randy laughed out loud. He was getting more and more interested in this restaurant. It seemed like this was indeed a treasure restaurant. Febid nodded. After hesitating for a while, he couldn't help but say, "That's true. Let me tell you, when it comes to meat, the first choice is naturally the red braised pork. Although the meat in the Buddha jumps over the wall tasted good, there was too little of it. It wasn't satisfying at all. However, the red braised pork is different. Since we are here, let's have dinner here before we leave," Robert said to Candace and Avis with a smile as he walked to the back of the queue. "Candace, speaking of which, we haven't seen each other for a while. Let's have dinner together today," Avis said to Candace with a hint of uneasiness in his eyes. "Ah, you are not worthy." Candace sneered and turned to leave. Seems like she still hasn't let go of what happened back then. Avis sighed as he watched Candace's carriage leave. He also turned to leave. The biggest impact of this duel on Mamie's was probably to promote the Buddha jumps over the wall and let everyone know how delicious the Buddha jumps over the wall was. 10,000 copper coins for a helping. This Buddha jumps over the wall is too expensive. 10,000 copper coins. That's equivalent to my salary for a month. I can't even save 10,000 copper coins a year. However, soon, some customers noticed the price on the menu and exclaimed, Some of them who were here for the first time got up and left quietly after looking at the menu. The price was too unreasonable. Ahem, ahem. Why don't we change to another restaurant? I think the freshwater seafood soup just now is pretty good. The skinny man who said he wanted to treat everyone to the Buddha jumps over the wall coughed awkwardly and turned to walk out. Okay. Let's change to another restaurant. Otherwise, if sister-in-law finds out, you won't be able to leave in the future. The people accompanying him were also stunned when they heard the price. They smiled and followed him out. Miss Mia, I'd like a helping of Buddha jumps over the wall and a helping of Yangzhou fried rice, as well as a Laji Rujiamo. Harrison ordered with a smile as soon as he sat down. He sighed in his heart. There were indeed benefits to being single. Hubby, what do you want to eat tonight? Do you want a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall? Then 3 Rujiamos will do. You must eat until you are full. Just then, a soft and sweet voice sounded from the side. A beautiful young woman helped a man who was walking unsteadily to sit opposite Harrison. They were very affectionate. Can a single dog like me eat properly? Harrison thought sourly in his heart. Chapter 1144. The Gould Manor was brightly lit, and a banquet was going on. The nobles in glamorous gowns were chatting and laughing with crystal glasses. The head of the Gould family, Mr. Charney, had invited everyone to attend the 3-year promise between him and his son. Of course, everyone close to Charney knew that he was planning to use this opportunity to formally introduce his successor to everyone. Everyone knew that the young master of the Gould family didn't like to do business, but liked to be a knight. Charney had been very anxious all these years. However, the 3-year promise was up tonight, and that young master who was once praised for his extraordinary talent didn't manage to become a mid-tier knight. According to the promise, he had to give up his dream of being a knight and become the successor of the Gould family. As one of the 4 biggest families in Chaos City, the Gould family had quite a bit of influence in Chaos City. The treatment of being the only son made the other nobles who were fighting for the right of inheritance very envious. However, this young Master Adams was stubborn and only wanted to be a knight. He had already become a joke among the second-generation nobles. That young Master Adams must be feeling terrible today, right? He's going to be forced to inherit billions of assets. Although he says he doesn't want it, he's probably overjoyed in his heart. How can there be a fool who doesn't like money in this world? Isn't that so? I heard many families want to send their young mistresses to the Gould Manor. You should be very happy too. A few young nobles gathered together and chatted merrily. Their tone was full of disdain and mockery, but their expressions were filled with envy and jealousy. Charney was very happy today. He welcomed the guests with a smile, and even his bald head seemed to be much brighter. His wife stood beside him and welcomed the guests with a smile too. When there was no one around, she tugged at Charney's sleeve and softly said, "Master, will Adams be unhappy? You've created such a big scene. Will he feel embarrassed and not want to come? Don't worry. Honesty is part of the chivalry that he loves the most. He will definitely come. This is a promise between men." Charney shook his head without worry. After that, he took 2 steps forward with a smile and shook hands with Hill, who had just arrived. He smiled and said, "Miss Hill, thank you for coming. You're welcome. This interesting duel is really worth witnessing," Hill said with a smile as she retracted her hand. "The city lord has arrived." A voice was heard. Everyone quieted down instantly. They all looked towards the door in shock that Charney had invited the city lord. "City lord, thank you for taking the time to come despite your busy schedule." Charney and his wife hurriedly went forward and spoke respectfully with smiles on their faces. Today, he had put in a lot of effort to help Adams. However, as the successor of the Gould family, he deserved such a scene. "Charney, I'm not here for you today. I'm here for that young knight who is vexed about inheriting his family fortune or becoming an outstanding knight. Personally, I'm very supportive of him becoming an outstanding knight and protecting Chaos City," Michael said with a forthright smile. Charney was slightly taken aback, but he quickly smiled and said, "You are his idol. If he heard you say that, he would probably be overjoyed." The guests arrived one after another. A man who was closer to Charney smiled and said, "Charney, where is our knight Adams? He's the main character today. Don't worry, he will come. He should be on his way now," Charney replied with a smile. Charney replied with a smile as he shot a look at the old butler who was standing at the side. The butler understood what he meant and turned to leave quickly. Everyone toasted and chatted with one another. There weren't many banquets like this where half of Chaos City's nobles were gathered. Many people were here to make more friends and establish deeper relationships with the nobles. That was the objective of many of them. As for witnessing the young master of the Gould family become the heir, it was just a formality. The news about him was not a secret. He had not made any progress in the past 3 years, so it was basically determined that he would never be able to become a mid-tier knight. Of course, as the heir of a family, he did not need to be very powerful. Hence, he would still become one of the nobles in Chaos City after he took control of the Gould family completely. His efforts to become a knight were nothing but a joke in the eyes of most people. "Charney, you can retire with peace of mind now," a middle-aged man said with a smile as he clinked glasses with Charney. "I still have a long way to go before I can let him familiarize himself with the business and know how to manage a family business." Charney shook his head. The smile on his face betrayed his feelings. The entire banquet was joyous and harmonious. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of Adams. The joke of the 3-year agreement could finally come to an end. Young, the old butler was just about to knock on the door when it opened from the inside. Adams, who was wearing gold and silver armor, walked out with a huge sword hanging on his waist. He was not wearing any armor, and his hair was very short. He looked almost bald. However, if one looked closely, they could see that his short hair was like the grass that had just sprouted in spring, trying to grow. "Let's go," Adams said calmly as he glanced at the old butler. Young master, it's not very appropriate for you to dress like this. I have already prepared a suit for you. Why don't you go back and change into it?" The butler said hesitantly. He felt that the young master looked a little different today, but he couldn't tell what was different. "It's okay. I'm not going to attend the banquet today. I'm just fulfilling the 3-year promise." Adams took the lead and walked forward. "Young master, it's not very appropriate." The old butler hurriedly followed behind. He finally understood why Adams looked a little different. He wasn't wearing a wig today. Moreover, young master's hair actually grew out again. The old butler followed behind Adams, and his heart trembled as he looked at the short hair on his shiny head. As an old man who had stayed in the Gould Manor for his entire life, he had witnessed old Master Gould's bald life. He had also witnessed Patriarch Charney's journey from a bald youth to a bald middle-aged man. He had also witnessed young Master Adams going bald at an early age. Being bald was like a curse that was tightly attached to the Gould family. But now, Adams' hair actually grew out again. Wasn't this too unbelievable? "Father, I'm here." Adams stepped into the banquet hall and shouted loudly. Chapter 1145. The armor that shone brightly under the light and the bald head attracted everyone's attention immediately. Everyone looked at Adams, who was standing at the entrance of the banquet hall, in astonishment. Their gazes could not help but linger on his head for a while before their expressions became strange. It was said that the Gould family had hereditary baldness. Be it the previous patriarch or Charney, they had all gone bald at a young age. However, Adams had always displayed a hairy appearance, which made people suspicious. From the looks of it now, he should have been hiding his symptoms of premature baldness. In fact, he had already followed in his father's and grandfather's footsteps and become a member of the baldness army. What a pity! Many young mistresses felt as if their hearts were about to shatter. Adams was the perfect spokesperson for a rich, handsome, and muscular family. He was almost the best choice for a marriage alliance. However, he had gone bald at such a young age. This was really unacceptable. The few youngsters who had previously surrounded Adams and mocked him stared blankly at him for a moment before bursting into mocking laughter. The atmosphere in the banquet hall became awkward because of Adams' appearance. The Hill looked at Adams with a hint of surprise in his eyes. His gaze moved from the top of his head to the shiny armor on his body, and a smile of interest appeared at the corner of his mouth. Michael looked at Adams, then at Charney, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Now that I look at it, they do look like father and son. Adams. Charney was also slightly taken aback when he saw Adams. He did not expect Adams to make an appearance in such a manner. One had to know that he had been refusing to meet people ever since his hair became sparse. After he got the wig, he would always wear it home. Other than a few old servants, no one knew that he had lost all his hair. However, he had removed his wig now. As for the armor on his body, even a 10th tier knight like the Castellan would remove his armor and put on a proper ceremonial robe when he attended a banquet. He had obviously dressed like this on purpose. Charney's expression quickly returned to indifference, as if he had expected this. He smiled at Adams and said, "Adams, you're here. 3 years ago, you said that this was a promise between men. 3 years have passed, and as a man, of course I have to fulfill this promise." Adams walked into the banquet hall with his sword in hand. He had a straight figure and a handsome face. Although there was almost no hair on his head, people still couldn't help but want to take a few more glances at him. So handsome. Even if he doesn't have hair, he can still kill those guys who can't even stand straight. A young lady held her chest and revealed a fangirl-like smile. "Ah, you're already bald, and you're still trying to act cool. What a big braised egg." A skinny young man with sunken eyes sneered. A few young men dressed in luxurious clothes beside him also chuckled, and their faces were filled with mockery and pride. Charney was originally worried that Adams would be completely dejected because of this matter. Seeing how composed he looked, he couldn't help but feel emotional. It seemed like Adams had finally thought it through. He nodded with a smile and said, "Seems like my child has indeed grown up and become a real man who can take responsibility and fulfill his promise. In this case, I can also entrust the Gould family to you without worry. Chief Charney, congratulations on getting an outstanding successor. Young Master Adams will definitely become an outstanding businessman like you." The people around them had already started to congratulate and flatter him in advance. Some even raised their wine glasses and prepared a toast. Charney's face was glowing. He had waited for this day for so many years, and it had finally come. It was his biggest wish to let the Gould family inherit its huge business and nurture Adams to become an outstanding businessman and a qualified chief. Everyone felt that the result of this 3-year promise was already set in stone. This was just a grand entrance ceremony that Charney had prepared for Adams. It meant that he had officially entered the circle of nobles and would eventually become one of the best among them. It was just a formality without any suspense. Charney placed his hand on Adams' shoulder and announced loudly, "I, Charney, the chief of the Gould family, officially announce here today that my son, Adams, will become the only father." Adams interrupted Charney's words. He looked into his eyes with a serious expression and said, 3 years ago, we agreed that if I couldn't become a mid-level knight in 3 years, I would obey all of your arrangements unconditionally, be it marriage or inheriting the family assets. However, if I became a mid-level knight, I would be in charge of my own life from now on, and you wouldn't interfere in any way, right? The banquet hall was silent. Everyone looked at Adams in confusion. They didn't understand why he had to repeat this meaningless agreement. Charney looked at Adams and nodded with a smile. "Yes, we agreed on this 3 years ago. So it's time for you to fulfill your promise now." Clang! Adams drew the long sword from his waist and raised it high above his head. A golden glow lit up from the sword hilt and climbed up along the patterns on the sword. It turned into a golden glow that enveloped the long sword and covered the extravagant chandelier above his head. This is sword aura light. It's the most obvious sign of a mid-level knight. Someone in the crowd exclaimed softly. The quiet banquet hall gradually became noisy. Everyone looked at the shining long sword with astonishment on their faces. Adams actually became a 4th-level knight. How is this possible? Didn't they say that his abilities had regressed over the past 3 years? How did he suddenly break through? The skinny young man who had mocked Adams earlier was in disbelief. He felt as though he had swallowed a fly. However, if this is the case, Adams should have won this 3-year agreement, right? More and more gazes were directed at Charney. He had painstakingly created such a scene just to pave the way for Adams to enter the circle of nobles in Chaos City. He didn't expect the tables to turn at the last moment. This was really too unexpected. This chap is quite interesting. Michael looked at Adams with a hint of admiration. So many rich and powerful people were racking their brains to fight for power and wealth, but this kid didn't want anything and only wanted to become a real knight. Such a young man was really rare. This. Charney looked at the glowing longsword in Adam's hand. He opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. Chapter 1146. Charney, who had been in the business world for a long time, still couldn't control the shock on his face when he saw the glowing longsword in Adam's hand. Just 3 days ago, he even specially looked for the master who taught Adams swordsmanship to confirm it. Adams didn't succeed in breaking through, and it seemed like he might stay at the level of a third-level knight for the rest of his life. That was why there was this grand banquet. But why did Adams become a mid-level knight today? This was really too puzzling. Mrs. Charney stood at the side and looked at the father and son with a conflicted expression. She was happy for Adams, but she was also worried for Charney. She didn't know what to say. Adams, when did you break through? Have you really become a mid-level knight? Charney asked Adams as he quickly calmed himself down. He had a doubtful look in his eyes. I just broke through last night, Adams said calmly. He then looked at Michael at the side and respectfully said, I would like to invite the Castellan to be the witness as to whether I have become a mid-level knight. Turning the sword into light. This is indeed something that can only be achieved after breaking through to 4th tier. I have observed the blood in Adam's body, and he has indeed reached 4th tier. He has officially become a mid-level knight. Michael nodded before extending his right hand to Adams. He smiled and said, Congratulations, young knight. Thank you. Adams quickly put away his longsword and shook Michael's hand. He couldn't hide the excitement on his face. With the Castellan as a witness, it seems like this 3-year promise is going to end with Adam's victory. Charney is probably going to have insomnia again. I really don't know what to say about this son of his. So impressive, a young 4th tier knight. Everyone looked at Adams and his son with different expressions. Some were surprised, some were gloating, and there were also some fangirls who revealed admiring smiles. Father, you will keep your promise, right? Adams looked at Charney as he tried his best to control his emotions. Charney's hands were trembling slightly. He had waited for this day for 3 whole years. He thought that victory was in his hands, and he was about to start his plan to groom his successor. He didn't expect Adams to give him such a huge blow. However, the stage had already been set up, and most of the nobles in Chaos City had gathered here. City Lord Michael had made the decision himself, and if he were to go back on his word, then he would be a complete liar, and the Gould family would be completely disgraced. Adams, I admire your character and talent as a knight, and you have once again proven this in front of everyone by becoming an honorable 4th tier knight. Your mother and I are proud of you. Charney reached out and patted Adams' shoulder gently as he said with an amiable smile, Don't worry, Adams, I'm not a knight. I promise you that I will not interfere with your progress towards becoming a great knight in the future. However, I hope that you can consider becoming a great knight while also becoming an outstanding successor of the Gould family. You will shoulder the responsibility of continuing the glory of the Gould family. Charney looked at Adams with a burning gaze. There was hope and anticipation in his eyes. Adams, you are your father's only child. Adams' mother also took 2 steps forward and held Charney's hand gently as she looked at Adams affectionately. Everyone was looking at Adams. No one should be able to reject such an offer, right? In the eyes of most people, Adams only wanted to become a knight because he wanted to have fun. When he had enough fun, he would return to his original position. I'm sorry, father. I reject. Adams looked at Charney and lifted his chin slightly as he revealed a confident smile. My hair has already grown back. I believe that I can become an outstanding knight. My goal is to become a great knight like Alex. What I need is focus, so I cannot be distracted by money and women. Hair? Charney's gaze shifted upwards and landed on Adam's head. His head was shining under the bright candlelight, and there was indeed a layer of new hair that was as fine as hair. It was like the grass that was moistened by the spring rain as it stuck out from the top of his head. Adam's hair has really grown back. Adam's mother was elated. She took a few steps forward instinctively, and her eyes turned red as she looked at the new hair that covered the top of his head. It has really grown back, Charney murmured in surprise. Back then, when he started to lose his hair, he had also shut himself off for a period of time. He had thought of countless ways to regrow his hair, but neither the doctors nor the mages could do anything about it. It took him many years to slowly accept his bald appearance, but he still felt uncomfortable every time he heard people talking about it behind his back. Wow, baldness can be cured now? Everyone expressed their surprise. Many people who were suffering from hair loss had their eyes lit up. They looked at Adams and thought about how they could get close to him and asked for the method to cure their hair loss. Charney looked at Adams, and it was as though he was covered in a layer of light. His gaze was still as clean and pure as a youth's. He recalled the youth who wanted to become an outstanding musician but chose to compromise in the end. Now, he had already forgotten how to hold a musical instrument. Have I still become the person I hated back then? Charney thought self-deprecatingly. He looked at Adams with a smile and said, "Since you want to become a knight like Alex, who was invincible when he was 30 years old, I will wait for you for another 10 years. If you're still a nobody by then, I will already be old. You can come back and inherit the family business." Adams looked at Charney in surprise. He thought that his father would try all ways to stop him. He did not expect him to propose a 10-year agreement again. Looking at the loneliness in his eyes, Adams felt guilty for the first time. After a moment of silence, he nodded solemnly and said, "All right, a 10-year agreement. If I'm still a nobody after 10 years, I will definitely come back and inherit the family business and continue the glory of the Gould family." Michael took a step forward and laughed heartily. "Since this is the case, let me be the witness for this 10-year agreement." What a strange person, the Hill thought to himself as he looked at Adams. However, on second thought, he was probably also a strange person in the eyes of others. It was late at night, and Amy's had already closed for business. The pitch-black hall on the first floor was completely silent. Just then, a bat that was hanging upside down in the corner quietly landed and turned into Camilla, who was wearing a black dress. She laughed coldly and said, "Haha, stupid human. Wait until I get the photo stone. I will definitely teach you a lesson. No pop-up window." Chapter 1147. In the dimly lit dining room, Camilla looked around and silently walked toward the staircase. She had already secretly observed the structure of the room upstairs when she was changing in the afternoon. There shouldn't be anything hidden in the bathroom, and the room on the right was closed. She didn't know what was inside. She directly ignored the room, filled with all kinds of toys. There were two more rooms on the left. One of them should be Gina's room, and the other should be Meg's room. This guy, he might have other plans for letting the mermaid stay with him in the shop. Luckily, I brought a photo stone. If there is something going on between the two of them, I can record it and use it as evidence. Camilla took out a white stone from her bosom as a proud smile appeared on her face. Soon, she tiptoed to the second floor. Click! Camilla opened the door to the study on the right softly. She dashed into the study. Her eyes emitted a faint light in the dark, and she could see everything clearly. The study wasn't big. There was a wall of bookshelves, and more than half of them were filled with books. There was also a brown wooden desk with 2 books and a tea set on it. There was nothing else in the room. Did this fellow really read so many books? Camilla's gaze swept across the various books on the bookshelves as she muttered doubtfully. Then, she started to search the room. However, she could see everything in the room in one glance. There were no cabinets or anything of the sort, and she didn't see any photo stone at all. Just as I expected, this fellow must have hidden the photo stone in the bedroom, and then peeked under the blankets in the middle of the night. He is indeed a perverted, stinky man. Camilla clenched her teeth and muttered to herself. If it weren't for the fact that he was a good cook she would definitely tear him into a million pieces. Camilla took a deep breath and adjusted her mood. Then, she slowly walked toward the bedroom. Although there was a wooden door between them, she could already feel the steady breathing of the three people in the room. They should all be sleeping. She was a ninth-grade vampire. It was too easy for her to hide from a normal person and two little ones. She placed her hand on the door handle and then silently opened the door. Camilla was stunned as she looked at the wooden door that didn't move. Why didn't the door move? Could it be locked from the inside? A trace of doubt appeared in Camilla's eyes. She turned the doorknob half a circle and then pulled the doorknob outwards with more force. The door remained motionless. Camilla stared at the door handle for a while to make sure that the door was not locked from the inside. But strangely, no matter how hard she tried, the door could not be opened. Her forehead was already covered in cold sweat. What kind of broken door is this? It's so hard to open the door. If I can't pull you away today, I'm not Camilla. Camilla said to herself angrily. She stretched her arms and legs and reached for the door handle again. Crack! At this moment, the unmoving wooden door made a soft sound and then slowly opened inwards. Meg leaned against the door frame in his pajamas and yawned. He looked at Camilla helplessly and said, "The door opens inwards." Camilla's expression instantly stiffened. She looked at Meg, who was standing by the door, and then looked at the wooden door that was slowly opening. She felt that her intelligence had been insulted. Furthermore, why was Meg standing here? Shouldn't he have finished watching the image recording stone and fallen into a deep sleep on his bed? Why are you awake? Camilla subconsciously blurted out. If your doorknob was abused like this, even a pig would have woken up. Meg glanced at the doorknob. Luckily, it was not broken. Actually, when Camilla had just appeared in the dining room, Meg had already received the system's notification and the tracking video at the same time. He only left the warm bed and opened the door for her when he saw that she was so stupid that she was about to tear the door apart. Furthermore, shouldn't I be the one asking you why you are here? Meg stood up straight and said with a teasing expression. Camilla panicked. In her plan, she would quietly get the photo stone. This was a matter of course. She did not even consider that she would be caught on the spot because she could not open the door. She looked at Meg and was stunned for 3 seconds. She started to retreat as she said, "Well, I seem to have entered the wrong room. It's getting late. You should go to sleep first. Don't worry about me." As soon as she finished speaking, she disappeared down the stairs. Then, there was a commotion downstairs, and the sound completely disappeared. This woman seems to be unwilling to stay in the dining room and be a waitress. Meg wrapped his clothes tightly and went downstairs to close the kitchen window. He then locked it. He indeed only had one photo stone, but the system could make countless copies at any time. Therefore, he did not care whether Camilla stole the photo stone or not. However, he thought that she would be content to be a waitress for a year. Now, it seemed that she was not so content. He had to be more careful in the future. Back in the room, Meg covered the two little ones with the blanket that Amy had kicked away. Then, he lay back on the bed and continued to sleep. Camilla turned into a bat and flew out of the dining room. She landed in the forest outside the dining room and stood on the top of a big tree. She looked angrily in the direction of Amy's. "Madam, did you succeed?" Caesar jumped onto the big tree and looked at Camilla expectantly. Camilla's eyelids twitched. She was naturally too embarrassed to speak of such an embarrassing experience. Her expression regained its calmness as she took out an image recording stone and said, "This kind of thing naturally can't stump me. It's just a stupid human." "Madam is wise." Caesar's eyes lit up. He immediately said happily, "In this case, Madam will not have to be threatened by that guy anymore. You also don't have to be a waitress in that restaurant anymore." Ahem. Camilla put away the photo stone and said with an uneasy expression, "Of course, I will not be threatened by a human. However, I will not let him off so easily. Therefore, I will continue to lurk in his restaurant and find evidence of his wrongdoings. I will give it to Miss Gloria so that she will completely give up on him. When that time comes, I will take advantage of the situation and succeed." "Madam is wise," Caesar said with a face full of admiration. Camilla smiled proudly, but the corners of her mouth were a little stiff. I have to start serving breakfast for the cleaners tomorrow. I have to learn how to make the congee with pork and century egg first. Lying on the bed, Meg pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery and stepped in. How did an ordinary duck egg turn into a beautiful century egg? It was more like a chemical reaction than a cooking process. The chosen egg was soaked in a mixture of alkali, salt, tea leaves, mulberry wood ash, and so on for a few days. After it was taken out, it was rolled in dry mud and then wrapped in rice chaff. Only then would the century egg be considered a success. Chapter 1148. A failed century egg. A mediocre century egg. A century egg that doesn't have enough skin. Meg looked at the delicately patterned century egg on the plate and raised his eyebrows. System, what the hell do you mean by not having enough skin? Profile picture. Meg Shin 3 years ago from the Porsche client of Mate 10-inch What Authentic Lake Weishan century egg. It doesn't have any skin at all. You'd better go home and look at Pikachu before cooking. Meg, what the fuck? Meg threw the century egg into the waste bin at the side and continued cooking. Life, if he could start over, he would definitely be a kind and loving rich second-generation heir who loved life and would never go online blindly. Failure. 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 Congratulations. You've successfully made a very chewy century egg. A successful century egg was indeed very chewy. Meg poked it with his finger. The chewiness was very obvious, and it sank slightly. After he removed his finger, it returned to its original state very quickly. The tea-brown century egg was translucent, and there were pine branch patterns on the surface. It was naturally formed, but it didn't lose its exquisiteness. It was like the work of a Chinese painting master, and it was amazing. After he cut it open, the 3 different colors were very distinct. The outer circle was very elastic and was a translucent tea-brown color. The middle circle was slightly yellow and had a soft texture. The middle circle was golden yellow. It was beautiful, like an exquisite work of art. Meg nodded with satisfaction. This was a century egg that was chewy and good-looking. A faint fragrance wafted over. After the century egg was done, cooking porridge was nothing to Meg. After dozens of failures, a bowl of century egg and lean meat porridge that looked, smelled, and tasted good was successfully cooked. I'll have this for breakfast tomorrow. A smile appeared on Mag's face as he inhaled the aroma wafting toward him. He then exited the test field for the god of cookery. The next morning, Meg opened the door and saw Camilla standing at the door. He teased, "It seems that our countess has found the right door today." A faint blush appeared on Camilla's arrogant face. She looked at Meg as if she wanted to eat him up. She snorted coldly and directly pushed Meg aside to enter the restaurant. Meg rubbed his shoulder that was a little sore from the collision. His gaze fell on Camilla, who had started cutting cucumbers the moment she entered the kitchen. He raised his eyebrows inwardly. This woman is not to be trifled with. "Uncle Meg, is there anything I can help you with?" Anna came downstairs and asked Meg if Anna wants to help. Meg glanced at the time. It was only 6 o'clock. The little girl really remembered her promise and got up early to help. "Good morning, boss." "Good morning, Anna." At this time, Yabamiya's voice came from outside. She walked in with a smile and greeted Meg and Anna. "Morning," Elizabeth said flatly as she followed him into the room. "It's so early. I think I should sleep a little longer." Barbara yawned as she walked in. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and still looked sleepy. "Everyone is here so early." "I thought I was the earliest," Gina said in surprise as she walked down the stairs and blinked her eyes. "Boss, we're all here. If there's anything you need us to do, just tell us." Yabamiya looked at Mag with an energetic smile and said energetically, "We're all here, boss." Meg looked at all the people present. There was still more than an hour before work started, but they all came early in such cold weather. He was touched and said with a smile, "I'm going to make breakfast for them now. It's congee with pork and century egg. It's also a new product that we're going to launch today. Take a seat and rest. I'll need you when the congee is distributed. Also, if you want to come, come at 6:30 in the future. Sleep more in the morning, Meg added as he walked to the entrance of the kitchen. A pot that was big enough to wash the rice and boil it over a large fire. Then, he added the various ingredients one by one. Meg was already familiar with the steps. The congee gradually thickened in the pot. At this time, there were already cleaners outside the restaurant carrying mops. They looked into the restaurant carefully. Oh my, look at this big crystal. Such a big piece, and there are two of them. How much would it cost? An old man exclaimed as he looked at the floor-to-ceiling glass window of the restaurant. He reached out to touch it, but he quickly retracted his hand when he was about to touch it. He said with lingering fear, "If I break it, I won't be able to pay for it even if I sell my old bones." Yes, such a beautiful restaurant. This is the only one in the Aden Square. Even Dukas' restaurant pales in comparison, an old lady exclaimed. Do you think the boss will really prepare breakfast for us? I heard that the cheapest dish here costs 200 copper coins per serving. There are so many of us here. Won't we have to eat a few thousand copper coins? Or is he just going to make something for us? A skinny old man said worriedly. Elton, don't talk nonsense. Mr. Mack is a good person. If he said he would prepare breakfast for us, he will definitely prepare it for us, old Jack said with a glare. Also, Mr. Mack is providing breakfast for us for free. Don't tell me you want to eat the best. I was just saying, I didn't even bring any biscuits today. If we don't have anything to eat, we will have to go hungry, Elton said with an embarrassed smile. He didn't say anything else. The cleaners gradually gathered at the door. They had started work at 4 in the morning. After sweeping for more than 2 hours in the cold, they were cold and hungry. Many of them were already stomping their feet on the spot. Sir, what are you guys doing at the entrance of the restaurant so early in the morning? Did you guys form a group to eat? Harrison and George asked curiously when they saw the cleaners gathered at the entrance of the restaurant. They had made an appointment to exercise in the morning, but they ended up lining up at the entrance of the restaurant after running a few steps. The boss of this restaurant is a good person. He said he would provide us with breakfast for free. Isn't it almost 6:30? We are waiting for breakfast, old Jack said with a chuckle. Wow, Mr. Mack is providing you with breakfast for free. How fortunate. Harrison looked at everyone enviously. Mr. Mack is really a good person, George said with a smile. Ding! Right at this moment, the bell on the door rang, and the door of the restaurant opened. Mia walked out with a relaxed expression, carrying a large pot that was much thicker than her waist. She gently placed it on the ground by the door. Is this what Mr. Mack meant by weak women? Harrison and George swallowed their saliva at the same time. Yabamia smiled at everyone, and then opened the lid of the big pot. A unique fragrance, accompanied by steaming hot steam, immediately surged towards the crowd. Chapter 1149. It smells so good. Everyone at the entrance of the restaurant looked at the big barrel, their eyes full of surprise. Smelling the tempting aroma and looking at the rising steam, their already hungry stomachs began to rumble. What is this? Why does it smell so good? An old man swallowed his saliva and stretched his neck to look at the big barrel. It smells so good. It smells like meat. Is he going to give us meat in the morning? Elton licked his lips and said in surprise, Meat! The moment they heard meat, the eyes of the cleaners lit up. With their salary, it was barely enough to fill their stomachs. They could only eat meat once every few months. If they could eat meat every morning, that would be too blissful. This smell is so unique. Is Mr. Mack coming out with a new product again? Harrison was also curious. He took 2 steps forward and looked into the barrel. The rising steam shrouded the big barrel, and he could not see what was inside. Just then, Meg walked out with a bulletin board and hung it on the door. Today's new product, century egg and lean meat porridge. Special for breakfast, Harrison said softly. He clapped his hands and said, I knew it. This must be a new product. Let's eat this for breakfast. Okay, George nodded. Mr. Mack's new products will never disappoint. Meg nodded at Harrison and George in greeting. Then, he smiled at the cleaners and said, Everyone is here. Please wait a moment. We will serve you a bowl of piping hot century egg and lean meat porridge. century egg, and lean meat porridge. That means there really is meat. Elton looked at the big barrel with sparkling eyes. His salary was not even enough for him to gamble, and he was in debt everywhere. He had not eaten a full meal for a long time, let alone meat. "Mr. Mac, it's okay. We're not hungry," old Jack said with a chuckle. "Nonsense. Your stomach has been rumbling for a long time," the old lady beside him said with a smile. As soon as the old lady's voice fell, a gurgling sound came from the surroundings, causing everyone to roar with laughter. "Looks like they're all hungry." Meg smiled and took a large bowl from Yabamiya. He scooped up a bowl full of congee with pork and century egg and passed it to the cleaner, standing in front of him. It was a bowl of thick porridge with maroon shredded meat and translucent century eggs as decorations, and a pinch of tender green onion sprinkled on top. It looked, smelled, and tasted good, making people salivate just by looking at it. Yabamiya looked at the crowd and smiled. "Everyone, line up and come forward to get your porridge." After a short period of chaos, the cleaners quickly lined up in 2 rows according to the usual lines for meetings and came forward to get the porridge one by one. "It's a little hot. Be careful," Meg cautioned. "Thank you. You're such a nice person." The cleaner took the bowl of porridge and said gratefully. He carried the big bowl and walked to the side of the stairs in the square. He placed his sack on the stairs and sat on the ground. He held the bowl and carefully blew on it. "Meat, it's really meat." Elton took the congee with pork and century egg, and his eyes lit up when he saw the shredded meat in the porridge. It was as if he had seen a precious gem. He turned around and directly reached out to grab a piece of shredded meat and stuffed it into his mouth without caring about how hot the porridge was. He chewed, and 2 streams of hot tears rolled down from the corners of his eyes. "Meat. It's really the taste of meat." More and more cleaners received their congee with pork and century egg. Most of them carefully held their bowls and sat on the stairs at the side, using the bowl to warm their cold and stiff hands. The heat and aroma wafted into their faces and added a hint of smile and anticipation to their wrinkled and dark faces. "Mr. Mac is such a nice person. Providing breakfast for these old people is more practical than anything else," Harrison said. However, his gaze was fixed on the congee with pork and century egg in the bowl, and he swallowed his saliva. "These old people are so pitiful." Yabamiya looked at those old people with pity. They were already so old, yet they still had to come early in the morning to do cleaning work. "So the job of a cleaner is so tough and difficult? I thought they only needed to use magic to do it casually." Barbara held her chin with a curious expression. This was too different from what she had imagined. She had always thought that these old people with big brooms were actually wizards. Elton wiped his tears and looked at those cleaners sitting on the stairs. His gaze landed on the empty seats at the side. There were beautiful wooden tables and chairs with exquisite carvings. Usually, only the rich and powerful could sit there and enjoy expensive food. However, they could only sit on those cold stairs. Why can they sit there, but we can't? Since he wants to be a good person, why can't he do it to the end? Elton suddenly felt jealous. He turned to look at Meg and chuckled. "Mr. Mac, since you're a good person, let me sit there and eat. It's not convenient to eat sitting on the stairs." "Sit." The cleaner's gazes also landed on the few tables and chairs placed at the entrance. If they could sit comfortably in front of a table like the rich and eat hot porridge, it would indeed be a very good thing. Meg passed the porridge in his hand to old Jack, who was at the back of the line, and reminded him to be careful not to burn himself. Only then did he look at Elton. His few white hairs were flying messily, and his tattered cotton-padded jacket had not been washed for a long time. There were layers of grease and dirt, and even his face looked like it could be scraped off half a kilogram of dirt. He was no different from a homeless person. However, he was a paid cleaner. Although his salary was not high, it was enough to ensure a normal person's food and clothing. Even if he could not live a decent life, at least he could live a cleaner life. Meg looked at Elton and said calmly, "I'm sorry, sir. I can provide breakfast for you, but I can't provide a place to eat because the restaurant will be open for business soon. As you know, cleaning is not an easy task." I need to ensure that my restaurant can operate normally. What does that have to do with anything? Can't we just wipe you clean after we're done? Do you think we're dirty? Elton said innocently. The cleaner's gazes landed on Meg with an indescribable emotion. Meg looked at Elton with a slight frown. Did the thing he was most worried about still happen? Dirty Grandpa, don't you know that you're really dirty? Just then, a soft and cute voice sounded from the restaurant. Amy walked out with Ugly Duckling in her arms and looked at Elton with disdain. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.